Now, I'm not so sure. It might make editing. Editing video is a big one. Something I can go out. I was just trying to something. Although, like, I'm sort of used to be around. I'm sure you will. Yeah, actually, he's got me. I'm past the problem. Just don't realize. Should it be a good year frame? That's all.
I know.
Literally, we have 30,608.
All right, so we're going to jump back in.
Oh, yeah, they're going up.
In our CMS. I'll send them this out.
All right, so how's everybody feeling? Good? You ate? I haven't completely made you want to run home yet?
No.
Yeah, I did good. Hopefully, like I said, I want you to really think, really quick as we're starting to get into analytics, I really want you to, just really quick, maybe we can share with our tables for like maybe 2 or 3 minutes, but I'd love for everybody to really highlight what's one thing from this morning that you can take away and do, right? And let's all maybe like share with your table. We'll give it just a couple minutes, but go ahead and tell each other everything we learned, because again, search engine optimization is about looking for opportunities and taking them when you have the time and the energy and the manpower and the resources. So there's nothing about what I shared today that means tomorrow you're supposed to go back and do it all. Nobody's doing that. The professionals aren't doing that, right? So really, like I said, let's just share for a few minutes with each other. What is one thing that you could accomplish based on what we learned this morning? So one thing you could work on. And you can just share with each other, and in a few minutes, I'll bring you back in.
Yes. I'm sure you're with. I'm not. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I'm not sure about this.
The main one, but.
Yeah, that's the. There.
I do remember about that today, but I remember seeing him. I'm not sure how
We did. Well.
Yes, do so. They need to be replaced on the board. Because I like the way that front.
Yeah, so ideally, what you could do is potentially have it. Because that's just. And that's where like for me. But I wouldn't feel like it's. I would just see, yeah, because again, it's just small. Keeping in mind that SEO is looking for opportunities where there's no hanging fruit and traction. So if something is just like, there's tons of work that I don't have time for, it's like, hold on. There's an opportunity. But yeah, but the one thing going forward that you asked me to do is just make it each thing. How can I start this instead? But if your business thousands of background, you see what I'm saying? Like each tag is a benefit. But if you can change every each tag, you might not make any difference. Because it's one of like 2,000 things.
Yeah, it would be.
Yeah, no, she got everyone sees the refresh.
H1s, H2s, H3s look great on the page because we're going to be focused on relation. And then like give them, like say, I love that H4. I love the other H2 and H1s. I want these to be the ones who just give them that direction. And these are the right code. And they write that in the code. Honestly, more than lie to data. It's got to be like 20 minutes. It's 20 minutes. It applies to every. They should be able to rebuild the site to start. And a lot of times. Yeah, I have a. They are looking at this. And so it's so funny. So they have conversations with them, and I remember copy paste this, and I send it back, and then she copied paste and sent it back. And you know, we started doing that. About our goals, and we doing great. Not saying she doesn't realign it, but that's what we wanted. And I'm like, well, let's just go and consider it one last time. Just forward down the emails. And I'll tell you exactly what to say that. So they understand that you know what you're talking about. And we'll make them feel good. Because I realized again, you have they don't package they're trying to package this up so they can have a fee to it. It doesn't last all the time. But yeah, she lost it. I don't know what this means. I got you. Use this rubber thing. All right, that's going to indicate that you become really highly educated. You're fine. She's probably responding to this. I mean, you all let me know because you give me a reason to keep coming to Huntsville. I will do it. I will do it. All right, so let's wrap up our conversation so we can jump back in. All right, so anybody here feel like they couldn't come up with one thing? Anybody? It's okay. We will talk afterwards if you couldn't come up with one action item. I'll figure it out. All right, awesome. Like I said, I really want to encourage everybody. I know when we have these conversations, it feels like I'm just talking about so many different things. But like I said at the beginning, it's really about figuring out where can you take action, where you have the resources to do something, where do you feel confident and excited about making a change? Maybe it's keyword research, maybe it's looking at your other pages and figuring out how to make them stronger. Maybe it's just talking to more partners and getting more links. There's no right or wrong way to do it, right? It's literally improvement as often as you can. So that's really what Google wants. I know that there's a lot of people out there that will tell you you have to do this long laundry list of 400 things. It's also like that in social media as well, where they'll be like, you have to be on all the channels. You don't. You actually don't have to do it all. What you want to do is figure out how are you just moving the needle every time. And like I said, it's not really about the technology, it's about serving people, just giving them a better experience. So I feel like when we stay centered in that, we feel more comfortable with the whole conversation, right? Especially in technology. It's like a lot of times technology can overwhelm people and make us feel a little bit like we don't know what we're doing. But the truth is, even me, after all these years, I don't know what I'm doing either. Right? I can be teaching this class right now and Google could be changing something while we're in this room. And tomorrow, part of what I said is not useful. And so it's okay to not know it all, not be perfect, to be experimenting, to be trying things. That's actually how we have to approach digital marketing in general. So I will say before we dive into data, and I want to encourage everybody, if you have analytics today, pull it up, because I'm going to go live and demo it, and I'll be able to actually look at your screens if you want me to. But I want to give a shameless plug of how I ended up here, which is an awesome event that I do in Asheville called the DIY Tourism and Local Marketing Workshop. My business partner gave me the okay that if anybody decides in November you'd love to come up to Asheville, that we will give everybody who is here today $50 off the price. Got some great early bird pricing, but we do a 2-day workshop event where we dig into all of this in a much bigger sort of way. We cover social media, we cover digital advertising, we cover a variety of SEO topics, and then we do some real tourism, sort of like marketing leadership type of awesome classes up there. So that'll be in the slides as well, if you'd like it. There's a great video about our workshop. And like I said, I feel like it's a really, really fun experience. And it's a small event. So we've really gotten to know everybody over the years, which I really love, because we usually max out at about 100 people. And then just for all of you going forward into your SEO journey, again, Canonical Pages, there's a whole section about this. So if you have pages with duplicated content, there's a way to manage that. There's something called Schema Markup, which is something you could talk about with your designer or developer. This is where, like I said, if you wanted reviews to show up in the results, if you wanted different things to show up inside of the Google results, you can actually code that stuff in. It's called structured data, which is kind of geeky, but it's a really cool system, especially if you're doing events. If you have products that you're selling, you can feature products in your results. You can have event information popping up. And again, this is just more information about this if you want to talk to a web designer or developer about how to up your game. But I also included my favorite resources for keeping up to date with all this stuff. So I've been studying, like I said, SEO since 2003. These websites have all pretty much been around the entire 20 years that I've been in the field. And so I really trust them. I trust the content that they're putting out, the updates that they give us about Google. I really love that, like Moz and Ahrefs at the top, they have amazing blogs that when you hear Google's changing something, they're usually going to talk about it, explain it. And so these are just like my personal resources. And then also for design and usability. So if you've never questioned the user friendliness of your website, there's a lot of ways that you can dig into this and learn more about it. And website usability is part of a bigger industry called UX, which is user experience. And again, it's really just focused on how are people having a good time or not with the technology that they engage with. And so UX is, I think, going to become a bigger and bigger conversation that actually we all have to be a part of. And it doesn't just apply to technology. It applies to how they chose the carpets for this room. It applies to how they laid out the lobby. It applies to how a retail store presents their different products when you walk through the door. It has to do with architecture. It has to do with events and how you develop them. So literally UX is like a bigger sort of, it's what we call human-centered design, right? So how do we design things that are more inclusive, that help more people? How do we get rid of some of our assumptions? Sometimes when we're designing spaces or websites or homes or experiences. So there's sort of this broader thing that I think is really stunning and awesome to be a part of, which is this conversation about how all the things that we're creating in the world become better for people, right? And actually provide everybody with an opportunity. And so in the spirit of never stopping our learning, we're going to move on to Google Analytics today. And Google Analytics, this is going to be a really fun conversation because we're going to start talking about what most of you probably have, which is something called universal analytics. It's the form of analytics that we've had for 20 years from Google for free. The system has always had things added to it over the years, but it has never actually changed until now. And as of July 2023, the universal analytics system will be removed and taken away. So this class is perfect because if you have the old version of analytics between now and July of 2023, I suggest you milk it for everything it's worth. Because in a year, we will no longer have that set. We will no longer have the same data. We will be living in a completely different world than we've lived in for 25 years, right? And that's for a few different reasons we're going to talk about. What we're moving on to is called Google Analytics 4. And it is their completely revamped version of their data tracking. And so just like you all, I am actually learning GA4 right now, which I find super annoying and horrible. But I am prepared to teach class on it, which is awesome. And I'm very proud of myself for getting to that point because it's taken me since like last November to get myself to a point where I feel really confident about this new version and how marketing people can use it. But this is a big sort of, if you're in the tech world, everybody's talking about it, right? And everybody is stressing about it. And the great thing is, I think we are going to be moving into a future where the data that we have is better, right? We're moving into a better world with this change. But like I said, while we have a year left of the universal analytics, I just want to encourage everybody to dig into it because it is intuitive in a way that the new version is not. It's also giving you information that in the new version we will not have due to the changes in our privacy and security laws across the globe. So I'm like, for those of us who are in marketing, right? We've been tracking people with cookies and getting a lot of information without a lot of oversight. Now, on one level, I completely agree. It's pretty much wrong and we have to change. Although as a marketer, thank goodness we've been wrong for so long because I've been able to get a lot of information that we may not be able to get down the road. But we're going to talk about how we approach that going forward. And in the long run, I think as consumers, as each one of us goes out into the world as an individual and interacts with different types of companies and organizations, we know that there really is value in protecting privacy and security, right? If you look at what Europe has done with GDPR, GDPR really says your data is a human right that you have the right to own, right? That your behavior belongs to you as a person. It does not belong to Facebook. It does not belong to Amazon. It does not belong to Instagram. It belongs to you. And that's where Europe made the biggest move to say, we are actually going to protect the rights of all European Union citizens and let them know that legally they have a right to say no to being tracked and to say no to having people take their data and then craft advertising for them, right? So that's where, you know, those little pop-ups you see a lot, say, you're being tracked by cookies, right? That's because most of Europe now, they have to be told that. It's legally a responsibility for every corporation to tell every European Union citizen that they're being tracked, that their data is being collected so that they can opt out. What we find is a lot of people in those countries in Europe, they actually leave your website, right? So we're seeing big dips in traffic, big changes in behavior about this. The US, we're kind of still out on how we're going to go in our country. There's still a lot of debate. And I would say as a technical person, part of the debate that's going on is so political, it makes no sense. So we've got technical decisions being mixed in with politics, which always makes kind of a muddy water of how we're doing things. We can see that obviously we have huge corporations in the United States that are going to actually seriously put their foot down around this. So Google is already lobbying the entire government right now to say no to certain changes. I want to say last time I looked, there's about maybe a dozen bills on the floor of our government right now to limit data collection. And so it's about to really blow up. Is what's happening, right? So that's why this conversation is so prime and perfect, I think, right now in where we're at historically. And if you didn't know, California has already adopted a similar law to the European Union. So people who live in California have different rights than the rest of us when it comes to their data. And in my mind, that's the worst nightmare that could happen to the US, right? Is that all of a sudden we go state by state and make privacy laws. I will probably become a welder or something at that point. I'll just tell y'all, I will like literally get out of tech if that's what happens. So I'm a little scared. California already went that direction. I would love our federal government to step up and make a decision, because I think splitting us up state by state is going to make running a website that is connecting to people across the country super difficult, right? You're going to have all this awareness of the different laws about what you can and can't collect. So to me, it's actually better if we just come to an agreement. And then we stick to that agreement as a whole. From a business and marketing perspective, it'll make it a lot easier for all of us. So again, we're going to go live for a lot of this afternoon, because looking at slides of Google Analytics is super not helpful in my opinion. But you will see when you download this slide deck, I have put in a ton of screenshots. And that's so whatever I'm talking about with you today, you'll actually be able to go back to this presentation and see screenshots of where I took you. Right? So, but really the best way to learn analytics is get in there and click on it. That's the best way to get used to it. The more you click, the more you'll remember. And so you really want to have time set aside to work on your analytics, especially when you're brand new to it, because literally it's just that muscle memory of figuring out where things are. And like I said, we're going to cover universal analytics, which is what most of us have at this time. And then I'm going to go live and also show you the new version, which is GA4. And one thing I would suggest, if you want to up your game in this world, is to sign up for the Google Analytics Academy. It's totally free. If you have universal analytics, obviously most of the academy is focused on the universal version that we've all had. They now have, I actually completed it just this week, so I could be prepared for today. They also have across the top of the academy new classes for GA4. And I actually went through and certified myself over the last week, because I wanted to make sure that I was really clear on what the GA4 situation is. So universal analytics, again, if you have your analytics, when we pull this up, you'll be able to kind of correspond. And I will say, if you can't see in the back, I want to invite people, once I'm live, feel free to just move your chair up if you need to, so that you can actually see what we're doing up here. But if you have your own analytics, you'll be able to kind of listen and watch as we click through the side and look at your own data. And again, I want this to be a conversation if anybody needs real support for what you're looking at. So don't hesitate to say, I'm looking at something, it doesn't look like yours. What's going on? And I'll walk over and I'll take a look at what you're doing. Because everything's a little different depending on your website, how it's set up, and so forth. I've outlined around universal analytics all the different sections, like I said. So you'll see when you get in there on the left, if you have universal set up, it'll say real-time, audience, acquisition, behavior, conversions down the left-hand side. When you click any of those, it opens up like these long submenus. So under acquisition, there's going to be this long list of stuff. Under audience, there's going to be a long list of stuff. This is where all your data is kind of housed in this universal system. There's also amazing ways inside of Google Analytics to adjust how you're seeing the data. So I can adjust dates. I can compare year over year. I can compare the last quarter of 2021 to the last quarter of 2020. I can see daily traffic, weekly traffic, monthly traffic. I can do all sorts of things by just adjusting all these settings. And so we'll look at those as well. And there's a ton of different, basically when you're adjusting the settings, it's going to sort of show you different reports and different ways of looking at the data. You can even click on to see like a list of things versus like a graph of things versus other types of graphs. So they give you a lot of different ways to visualize the data. I'm a spreadsheet dork. I look at a million spreadsheets and love it. But for those of you who are more visual, I will encourage you to click on those little icons that give you a visual instead of like a long spreadsheet of information. And like I said, each of these sections, audience, right, I go through and literally show you everywhere that we're going to go today. So that's why, like I said, it's not, there's so much involved in it. I realized later on, you might want to go back and say, okay, how did we get to this section or that section? So I've mapped it out pretty much entirely in here. So like I said, you can see even all the way down to some of the more advanced stuff. I've outlined it for you so you have the ability to look at that. But we're going to start by just logging right in to Universal Analytics. Now, when I log into Analytics, because I have a lot of accounts in my that I'm looking at, I have this sort of drop down where I can go through all the different websites and different things that I'm looking at, right? Sometimes when I log in, it's going to take me to a choice. Like it's going to tell me, like, which website do you want to look at? If I've only got one website, though, it's usually just going to drop me directly in to one of them. And it's usually going to hit me on the real-time area. So both versions of Analytics have a real-time area where you can see who's on your website and what they're doing at that exact moment. Right? So if I look at this website right now, if somebody was just on there, they just disappeared. If you just saw that, there was one person. It literally shows me, where did they come from? Was it organic search traffic? Was it social media? Was it another website? It'll show me where they're located, right? It'll show me how long they're looking at the website, and then it'll even show me which page they were on. So I don't use this a lot, but I do have some clients that have events. And if we're having an event where we're going to send people to the website to do something, it allows me to literally see in real time while that event is happening if people are on that page doing what we ask them to do. Right? And so whenever I'm doing something in real time, this becomes a place where I can really integrate my website into that experience that I want, and then track and see if people responded to the idea of completing a survey while they're at my event, or watching a video that we told everybody to watch while they were there, right? Or downloading something for free that we're giving away. I can literally see if people are doing it on their phones right there in my location. So the real-time spot, not everybody uses it. Some people gloss over it because it's not as valuable. I think other companies, like I said, that are doing more real-time experiences, they have the ability to utilize this in a bigger way. The next section that I think most people dig into is the audience section. And let's keep in mind, just to be clear, Google Analytics is tracking what happens on your website. It's tracking where people came from, what they do when they're on your website, and when and how they leave the website. Okay? If you do some advanced tracking and setup, it'll also track conversions. So if I have an online store, I can set up e-commerce tracking, and it will track every sale and tell me if those people came from Facebook or Google or direct or another website, and then what they bought and how much they paid, right? So I can take it to that level if I have an online store. I can also do simple things though and track whether or not they downloaded a free download, whether they completed a form and hit a thank you page, right? So those conversion pieces, there's simple versions of that and more complex versions, but it's really only tracking what people do on your site. So if they leave your website, you can't jump over there, right? So like if I sell my class on Eventbrite, I can see people hit my class page. And if I have a special code, I can see them clicking on the buy now button. But I'm not going to see them buy because they're buying on another website called eventbrite.com, right? And my Google Analytics can't magically jump over there and start tracking what happens, right? So just always keep that in mind. It's really encapsulating your own website. The exception with the new version is if I'm a company with a website and an app. So like my bank, right? First Bank, they have a website, localfirstbank.com, and then they have an app that I can put on my phone, right? I can get it from the App Store. Now with GA4, what Google's going to do is allow you, if you're a larger company, to track movement between the app that you own and the website that you own instantly, right? So that's why they're making this change, because a lot of larger corporations now have web apps as well as an actual website. And so they want to make that seamlessly integrated. But I just want you to understand the difference, because a lot of times people are like, well, they're buying over here, so why can't I see that? I'm like, well, because that's not your website. That's somebody else's website. We can't magically send code to somebody else's website and steal their data, right? So we want to understand the kind of that relationship there. With the audience section, there's a few things that I think are really valuable. And again, if you have questions about other stuff, let me know. Today, because we only have 3 hours, I'm going to highlight the things I think are most important to work on, right? Because again, none of us look at all of this every month. We look at like 5 things a month, right? Because really that's probably what you had time for. If you got a bigger team, maybe you're looking at 10 things, but nobody is like crunching all this data every single month on a regular basis. It would be too much. But the highlights under audience, the first one is Geo and Location. This is where you can see where everybody is that visits your website. Right, so this is where I can literally know geographically every visitor to my website, where are they standing physically, right? Because it's tracking their IP address. So I look at the world. If I scroll down, it's also going to give me a list, right? But I can also just see this darker one is the US. So click on that. I could also click on United States in that lower area. Now it's giving me a map of the whole country. And it's telling me which states are most popular or least popular. Right now, this is only showing me 10, but we have traffic from all 52 states. So I can do this little, it's hard to see, but there's a little drop down where I can say, show me up to 100 results. And now I've got the full list, right? So these are all the states that have sent me traffic. Right now, we are defaulted to basically, I set it to the last year right here. Now, the cool thing is here's North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida. I can also see these on the maps. The darker they are, the more traffic there is. I go into one of these states. Now I'm going to see every single city in town, right, that people sent traffic from. Right? So I love this because it really allows me to see where are people when they're coming to the website. Are they local? Are they not local? Is it across the globe? Is it across the country? What's going on? I've used this a lot with companies that want to build a more national following. When we can see that we've got some traction in a certain area, we're going to make decisions to run ads in that region, right? So like, hey, you guys have never really targeted into Detroit. Well, we have a bunch of people coming from that region. Let's like drop some advertising in that area, see if we can get more people on the website because there's some sort of market happening there that we're not even creating. It's happening on its own, right? So I love using this geographic area to just really understand where are people coming from. If I was more international thinking, there's also a whole section here on languages, right? So I can see a lot of information about, is it mostly English speakers? Is it other types of people? Again, I've worked on a lot of websites where we have an English and Spanish component. And many times we've decided when we need to invest in including that Spanish component based on the amount of traffic we have coming from Spanish speaking people, right? And once we're at a certain threshold, it's like, if we're getting up to 20, 30%, where we can see that's that many people that are coming, speaking another language, we're going to think about how we can have that little button that says switch to Spanish, right? And translates the whole website. The other area that I really love in here is basically this mobile section. And this is where I told you earlier, you're going to be able to see what percentage of your traffic is mobile, which is typically smartphones, versus desktop, which is laptops and desktops, and then tablets, which are segmented in by themselves. And so here, if we look at the last year, these folks, if we include mobile, which is phones, and tablets, we're at just about 62% mobile traffic, right? And then desktop and laptops are basically just under 40. So this is very common, in my opinion, to see people with half or more mobile traffic on the websites. Again, I work in the business to business world. So when you're not selling to consumers, sometimes you'll find there's still a lot of people coming from computers because they're sitting in an office, right? So people who hire me are other businesses. A lot of times my website, we're only at like 10 or 20% mobile traffic. That's because people who are hiring me are literally in their office, getting a budget approved and then calling me. So they're probably on their computer at work doing that a majority of the time. But even B2B, we see that that mobile number is starting to creep as more and more people start to work on their tablets and their phones when they are en route and doing other things. But this is something I feel like is really important because if we see that over time this is increasing, we're going to keep investing more and more time in approaching our mobile version of the website. How do we make it better? How do we make it load faster? There's a lot of ways nowadays where you can have a website where you build it, and on a larger screen, it shows a certain amount of information. And then on smaller screens, you can limit what shows, right? So the experience is easier and simpler. So I work a lot in WordPress, and this is something WordPress is like a master at, right? There's a lot of WordPress themes, which are their templates, which allow me to say, I want to have this section show on a computer, but I want it to be hidden on a phone, right? So I use an awesome theme called Divi, and literally every page, if I think the page is getting too long, I can be like, well, what are the top priorities on a phone? Cool, I'm gonna hide these 3 sections. So the phone version is much simpler and straightforward and gets people to convert faster when they're on a mobile device, right? But a lot of times I've been using this over the years because for a while people were like, mobile phones, who cares? I don't want to worry about it. I'd be like, cool, we got 8% traffic, we're not worried about it. We hit 20, I'm like, we should start worrying about it. We hit 30, I'm like, yo, we really have to start worrying about it, right? So I convinced a lot of people to redesign their websites into like right around 2010, because I could really see that smartphone traffic was starting to blow it up. And I was like, y'all, we had to get on top of this. We can't have some old website where people are doing this,
Yeah.
right? Trying to zoom in to read something. A lot of us have been in that position before. So it's not, that was part of the evolution of our technology. But it's like at this point in the game, nobody will do that, right? They're just going to scroll on by if you're making them work too hard for it on their phone. The other thing I'll just mention in here is there are these sections called demographics and interests, and people often ask me about these. A lot of times when so these require usually, and they'll have a little enable button. So if you're looking at your own analytics and you've never looked at these, you might see that it's not enabled and you need to turn it on. There'll be a little button that'll say enable it. And then you'll have it enabled, and then like 6 months from now, you'll be like, it's all zeros. What the heck? I turned it on, but there's no data. So one thing to be aware of is demographics and interests are really associated with the Google Ads system. If you have a big website with a lot of organic traffic, you might see data in here. But really what those sections were created for is for people who are running ad campaigns, right? To see the demographics and interests of the people that are driving from advertising. Now, there's slightly different rules between what you can collect about people clicking on ads versus what you can collect about people that are just surfing the web, right? There's a little difference there. And so that's where if you're not running Google Ads and your website is not getting thousands of visitors a month, you might turn those on and they never fully populate. And I just want you to, that's normal, right? Because what Google is saying is, unless we have a large enough sample size to give you demographics and interests, we're not going to give it to you, right? And their idea of a large enough sample size is like thousands and thousands of people. So smaller websites, you will notice in Google Analytics, there's often been things where it'll just say, there's nothing to report here. There's no data available. And that's just because you haven't gotten to a size of website in which Google is going to give you that data, right? And we'll talk about how to fix some of that from a first party data perspective. But I know a lot of people go in here and turn these on and then they're very sad when there's not results. And I'm usually like, well, start running Google Ads and spend some money and they will help you out, you know, or just wait until your website is really grown to a point where it's meant for that type of data. We always want to remember that these systems are not just tracking websites like mine, which are really small and only get a few hundred visitors a month potentially, all the way up to, you know, Walmart and Belk and TripAdvisor, right? So this system has the ability to track tiny, tiny websites and very, very, very large multi-million-dollar websites. So that's why some of the tools you won't really use in the long run. And then you'll notice everybody sees this little orange thing that says beta, like, right? So there's a lifetime value beta, cohort analysis beta, cross-device beta. So whenever you see beta, that means Google's testing it. So run away. It's not accurate. Don't look at it. Don't start putting stock into whatever they're doing. That's where they're really testing new tools and basically evolving the system. And they put beta next to it so that you know there's still glitches in it. right? So sometimes people see something new and they're like, oh, what does this mean? I'm like, not yet, because if it says beta, it's not 100% proven to be working correctly, right? And right now you can see they've got a few beta things in here. It's because actually they're going to can this whole system and move on to GA4 next year. And so they've been testing GA4 things inside of this system. But the sweet spot for marketing, and where I have lived mostly for the last 20 years when I'm working on the system, is acquisition. And to me, like I said, this is where you want to get as much out of this section of your system as you possibly can in the next year. And acquisition means exactly what it sounds like, right? Where did you acquire the traffic? How did those people end up? And so this is where I can see organic search traffic. I can see social media traffic. I can see email traffic. Any types of digital advertising that I'm paying for will show up here. It will show me direct traffic, which means somebody actually had bookmarked my website, or they just knew it and just typed it directly into the browser, right? Or maybe somebody emailed them a link privately as an individual, and they just clicked on that link and it took them right to the website. That means my brand recognition, my name recognition is working. Right, so when people do more traditional advertising, like TV ads, radio ads, print ads, those type of things, a lot of times if I want to see a result from those things, I'm going to watch direct traffic, because hopefully over time our direct traffic is going up because our name is getting put in front of all these different people, right? So to me, there's a great reflection there. It's not an exact science, but most of us, when we see ourselves doing some of that kind of more traditional approach to marketing, we can still see the impact on our website, right? Especially if our radio ads have the website address in it, or the print ads have the website address for people to go to. That's going to see an increase in direct traffic.
It's a good percentage. What would you call a good percentage for direct traffic?
There's no real benchmark. I think it's about each organization or business and what are they focusing their energy on, right? So I've seen companies where the vast majority of their traffic is direct. So like, that's because you all are like pumping out like some really awesome local print ads. You're doing a lot of networking. You've got salespeople out talking to folks, right? And so you're actually making that one-to-one connection or one-to-move connection, and you're just getting a really good response. It's like word of mouth, kind of seeing the action to a certain extent. Of course, it's only going to happen if when I'm in those scenarios, I'm really putting the website in front of people, right? So I feel like some people I've seen, you know, it's driving half their traffic. Other people, it's not driving much. Some people, organic search is driving 90% of their traffic. Yeah. So in some ways, that's really great, because that means whatever you've done in the past, as far as, like I said, like PR and just getting the name out there, letting people know the website is a resource, so that has worked in some way, right? And so really, when we're looking at that, it's like if I'm doing search engine optimization, I want to see organic search traffic go up. If I'm doing social media a lot, I want to see social media go up. If I'm doing email newsletters every month, I want to see email traffic going up, right? Because that's proving to me that what I'm doing is actually producing at least one first step of the result, which is getting people to go to our website. So I'm always looking at where are we putting the effort, and does the results we're getting match the effort? And if there's a discrepancy there, we got to talk about that, right? Because I have some folks who are like, well, we're spending all our time on social media. I'm like, well, social media is like 12% of your traffic, so what's up with that? Like, if you're doing all that work every week, we would expect to see it increasing over time, right? Not kind of staying the same. But in this area, if you go into acquisition and go into overview, this is where it pretty much is going to give you like a snapshot of everything that's going on. So right now, again, I've got this defaulted to the last year almost of data. And this is a great example because I've worked with these folks for probably over a decade with a number of different people on their team. SEO is their top priority. And so you can see organic search traffic from search engine optimization is that blue piece of the pie, right? So that is literally like 76% of their traffic comes from people finding them on Google. When we first started working together, I would say about half their traffic came from Google. And so they were like, this is where we see the traction. We want to amp this up. We went through all their old pages. We did keyword research. We basically optimized a ton of pages. They were amazing because they're called the Blue Ridge National Heritage Area. They are funded by the state of North Carolina. So they're one of the few clients where they actually already had a link on our state.gov website. The first thing I did when I saw that was go look at that page. I was like, can you guys call the state and be like, hey, would you put up our logo and this blurb and the link, please? Because if we amplified this little thing they've got on the .gov website, it would make a big difference. And we did that. We saw them make massive leaps over the course of like 3 months because that .gov relationship, it infused so much authority into the website for us to expand how that link. Basically, originally it was just a text link. What I asked the state of North Carolina to do was put their logo, a text link, and then one small paragraph about exactly what they do that was really written with clear keywords, right? And when we did that, we saw Google immediately respond to that piece, right? So again, looking for those opportunities to really quickly connect. You can see after that it's direct. These guys have been around decades where we live. They run our Blue Ridge Parkway Visitor Center, right? So a lot of people know about the Blue Ridge National Heritage Trail because when they go to our visitor center, they're going to see that name right there. And they also have a music trail that's part of their main trail through our whole 23 county area. And so they have great name recognition. You know, you'll see that little orange slice is social media. So this team, they just hate social media. That's not their thing. They post some things now and again to keep things fresh, but they really don't use social media as like a marketing tool. They really use it more as like a customer service tool. They just put things up, you know, a little bit here and there to make sure it's not getting out of date. But that really as a team, they decided social media was just not something that they could attack. But they didn't have the manpower for that. What they did have though was already good traction on Google search, and they wanted to amplify that to get more traffic. And so that's what we did. So that is a perfectly acceptable choice. I know social media people would like to tell you it's not acceptable to decide that you don't want to do social, but that is not true. There's lots of other ways to connect with folks, right? And then that little yellow strip is what we call referral. So this is where we see, earlier we talked about people who link to your website. Every time somebody clicks on that link and ends up on your site, it's in what we call referral traffic, right? And so these different areas, you can click on these links and basically dig deeper down into any of these. So if I click on organic search, it's going to take me into an area and show me a bunch of different stuff. Now, years ago, Google Analytics used to have keyword data. They took it away, like, I don't know, at least 10 years ago. And they put all the keyword data in the search console, which I talked about in last class, right? So this is one thing I want to point out. If you have universal analytics, the keyword data is useless. I wish they would actually just get rid of this column. It should not actually even be there, because if you look, I know it's hard to see, but that first one, it says not provided. That's 97%. Then it says not set. That's another 2.5%. So basically we're at 99.5%. There's no keyword data available. So if I scroll through these keywords right here, right, and there's actually, again, about 50 of them. So I can drop this down to see 50. There are keyword phrases here, but we want to realize this represents like less than 1% of the traffic. So the keyword data is irrelevant if I'm only talking about 0.5% of the people. Right? So that's where the keyword, the Google Search Console becomes that place to understand your keyword rankings, right? You can't do it anymore in this system, even though they will often show you this weird 0.5% piece of the pie. I'm like, thanks for that, because it's not very helpful overall from a data perspective. But what you have up here is these little links. It says source and landing page. If I click source, this is actually going to tell me Google, Bing, Yahoo, DuckDuckGo, Baidu, Ecosia, Quant. So these are all different search engines across the world that this website is shown up in, right? Of course, Google takes 90.02% of the traffic. So all the other search engines together only make up 10%, and Google takes the full 90. So we can see they're the big player. Bing is at about 4.5. Yahoo's at about just under 3. Right. So if we take, basically 5, 3, we're at 98 between those 3. Right. And so all these other search engines, things like Baidu, that's from another country. Right. DuckDuckGo, again, is a search engine that's been around a long time. They are no tracking of any kind. So they're like big in it's funny. My partner is like very anarchist. So she's always like, I will never search on Google. And she's been using DuckDuckGo for like 15 years because she thinks somehow the government is tracking her and cares. And so I'm always like, I don't think anybody cares what you're shopping for. Yes, absolutely. But like I said, Bing, Yahoo, and Google, I think you're usually going to see at the top. And then if we go to landing page, this is where I can really see the organic search traffic, which pages of the website are the most important for search engines. So when I was talking about don't delete things until you check them, you can look at the search console and look at the landing pages, but you also have the ability to see it in here. So when we look at the last year, this is what I think is so exciting. So this little line, that's their homepage, right? So again, in the system, we assume we know the .com. We don't need to repeat the .com everywhere, right? And so my homepage is sarahbenoit.com/ that's it, right? So that slash just means that's the homepage. Their homepage, when it comes to Google, is the 8th most popular page, not the 1st, right? So this is just reinforcing what I said earlier. Every page of your website, every blog post, everything you've ever posted is a doorway into your website, right? People can enter through any page. It does not have to be your homepage. So if we look at it that way, we really have to put more thought into the pages and what they're doing, right? To make sure that if somebody enters the website through them, they know what to do, right? Blogs are a great example of this because when people are writing blogs, a lot of time we have that older layout where it's just kind of an article and maybe you have like a sidebar with some things, but it'll be like, like a journalistic article kind of laid out. A lot of reading, not a lot of imagery sometimes. Usually there's one photo. It's kind of like the old school way of doing it. I'm really encouraging people to lay out your blog in a more engaging way. Have clickable buttons, have steps you want them to take. Don't have kind of that old school like article sidebar with a bunch of stuff you don't need, okay? And especially having sidebars that are laundry lists. We were talking about this at lunch. If you didn't know, the human brain hates laundry lists. We don't want anything to do with that. And Americans are the worst because we have so much access to information. Like I travel all around the world, right? And everybody on the planet has a smartphone, but not everybody on the planet is like me walking around with a MacBook Pro and an iPhone and my iPad is upstairs. Okay, that's particularly American that I feel the need to do that, right? And so because we have so much access to information, Americans are even worse than everybody else. It's like if we have more than 3 options, all of us are like, bye, I don't have time. It's like, I can choose this, this, or that. Cool. But as soon as you're like this, 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 or I'm like, bye, my brain just checked out. I literally just scrolled away because I was like, I can't. I don't have the ability to make a decision about 5 things. I only make a decision about 2 or 3 things at a time. And so that's where we have to be really thoughtful when we're designing websites, that we think of it in that process, right? A page with no more than 3 options, click. Another page with about 3 options, click. Another page with about 3 options. When you give somebody a laundry list of like 7 options or 12 options, you're literally pushing their brain to just turn off, right? Especially because we're also in the United States, big multitaskers. So we're like in line at the grocery store while we're talking to our kid, while we're scrolling on our phone, looking at something, right? And so again, when we're asked to make decisions between long amounts of information, it actually tends to cause us to just kind of shut down and go away. So to me, when we look at this type of stuff, these are definitely different types of articles on their website, right? Especially about their trails. And so I can see right away, like there's a little town called Sparta. It's gotten a lot of traffic. I know from working with these guys, the reason that page about the town of Sparta gets so much traffic is because the town of Sparta is a tiny place in North Carolina there's not actually that many websites in that town about the town. So Blue Ridge National Heritage Area in a lot of ways ranks very high for small towns across the 23 counties that they serve, right? Because those towns don't have the money to invest in big websites and optimizing them and doing all that sort of stuff. So they become this sort of like gateway for smaller towns and cities. Romanticasheville.com, which I mentioned, also does that. They have a whole section on small town Main Street. And a lot of that was so that their website, which was already getting a lot of attention for Asheville, could then take some of that attention and put it out to the surrounding 20 counties around us, right? Because those of us who live in Asheville are like, we have too many people, please send them to the areas around us, right? Because we're not a big city. So as we're getting millions and millions of people every year, we're trying to take that and actually build our whole region and be like, hey, we love that you're in Asheville, but you can go to Brevard, you can go to Silva, you know, you can go out to the Smoky Mountain National Park in Cherokee, right? Because we see that that's actually going to benefit our whole region if we start to disseminate some of that stuff out. So we've got a bunch of websites in our region that are really kind of bringing in a lot of traffic and then funnel it back out to smaller areas to give them some attention. You'll also see attractions like businesses, right? The Tweetsie Railroad. There's this awesome place called Judaculla Rock, which is a rock that has carvings in it that they have dated to before what we have is like when Cherokee culture started, which was over 10,000, 11,000 plus years ago. The carvings in the rock are a language that are before Cherokee, right? It's actually in the middle of somebody's farm. It's been preserved for like decades and you can go and visit it, right? But again, it's not a business. Nobody really owns it. Somebody owns the farm, but they've given that piece of property to preserve the rock to the region, right? So you just drive down this windy road, you end up with this weird rock with what looks like alien writings on it. Honestly, it's real ancient aliens, y'all. It's really fascinating that we have that out in the mountains in the middle of nowhere. But you know, they really dominate attracting people looking for that place because there isn't anybody to build a website for it, right? There isn't anybody that's really kind of in charge of it. It's not, you're not paying to see it. You're just getting to go see it for free. So they look at different, they've looked at different things like this over the years, about how there's nobody else talking about the subject. How can we take that subject and build a page about it and then grab that traffic? And again, we learned a lot of this from doing keyword research about their regions and understanding what people were really looking for in our more rural areas of Western North Carolina. And so again, there's a bunch of trails listed here, right? There's some information just about the Cherokee-Qualla boundary. Again, lots of trails are in here. There's some lake stuff in here, a few different attractions in here. But as you can see, some of these things, every year that I look at their data, I find that their homepage is usually the 8th or between the 8th and the 15th most visited page. And then we have all these other pages that are garnering thousands of people to them, right? Around more specific topics. So this is where that long tail conversation comes in, right? So for search engine optimization, I love this. The other thing that you can do in here that's a little more technical is add secondary dimensions. So right now, if we think about it, I'm looking at organic search traffic, how much traffic came from the search engines. I'm looking at which pages people landed on. So I know I don't really ever want to delete any of these pages, right? Because they're doing really well. But then I can add some additional sort of pieces of data here. So I can go in here and say, I want to see from the users report what cities people were in. And what it's going to do is add another column, right? And so now it's listing the cities that are associated with when people found these pages. And I can actually also filter things through here. So let's say I want to see what different cities people came from when they looked at the Sparta page. I'm going to put Sparta in the filter. And I'm going to apply that. And now it's basically going to, oh, and I have to exclude Spartanburg. So, but when I filter it now, basically if I excluded the Spartanburg list, it would just show me the Sparta page in all the different cities people came from looking at that content. Right. And so that's where the filter allows me to both include and exclude things. So if I go back here to the filter, I've included the town name Sparta. And then, well, let me see if it'll let me. It's funny. I might have to just organize by, let's see, the landing page name. So again, if I click onto these top columns, it rearranges stuff. So it'll be automatically by users, but then here I've organized it by landing page. Great. So yeah, so I've got that Sparta page at the top, and now I can see kind of the different places that it's coming from. Right. And the cool thing is it's all coming, it's funny, people who live in Sparta are finding the page. Right. And that kind of makes sense to me in the sense that if you don't live out there in North Carolina, you might not know about this town. Right. So it's people in the region right around that town are actually finding out information about what to do there and the trails there and things like that. If we go back to the channels list, like I said, this is all for organic search. This all has to do with basically search engine traffic. But if we go back to the channels list, we can also click into social media, direct traffic, referral traffic. Direct traffic, we don't have to click into as much, but if we click into social, we can see they've gotten traffic from Facebook, Pinterest, LinkedIn, and Blogger, which is a website where people blog, right? It's kind of like WordPress.com. If we click on Facebook, now we're filtered down just to the Facebook traffic to see it, right? And again, we can add in different dimensions like city or device if we want to see some additional things about them. And also when we're back up here, there's a whole section called social. So if you really are doing social media and you want to dig into it, I would just go into that social section, right? And this is going to show you a deeper dive. So here it is, Facebook, Pinterest, LinkedIn, and Blogger. As I click through this section, it starts to break down more information about this, right? And so essentially it's showing me this is the total traffic for the website here at the bottom. This is the social media traffic. So this is where I can see right away if I didn't know these folks, I can see right away that they don't do a lot of social media. It's only a small percentage of their traffic, right? And I have a landing pages section in here too. So this is where I can see again, which pages of the website have gotten the most traffic from my social channels. So right away, again, if we look at this, we see Judaculla Rock right at the top again. Because again, they dominate for that type of stuff because there's so few websites out there that feature that particular little place. But this is really allowing me to see from Google's perspective, what pages on the website are doing well. From a social media perspective, what pages are getting the most traffic. And in addition to looking at the most traffic, if I look at the columns over here, I basically have sessions, page views, average session duration, and pages per session. And what I want you to realize with those columns, especially page views, average session duration, and pages per session. So in analytics, here's the basic breakdown. Every person is a user, right? So every single person is a user, that's an IP address. The only exception would be if you and I are sitting at the same table on the same computer or the same phone, it's going to read us as one user, even though there's two of us. But we're not there yet to make that leap where Google can spy on the fact there's two people and then tell us, right? So basically, one user is typically equal to one person. One person can visit the website 1 time or 3 times or 5 times. That's sessions. Every time I visit the website as an individual, I create a new session. So one person can visit the website multiple times, create multiple sessions. Once I'm on the website, I can also look at 1 page, 5 pages, 10 pages. Those are page views, right? So as one person, I can go to the website multiple times and create multiple sessions. I can also, in those sessions, look at multiple pages and create even more page views. So if you're old like me, page views were originally called hits. My website gets 10,000 hits a month. right? People will be like, oh, it's 10,000 people. I'm like, no, that's not accurate. Nope, page views were originally what we called hits. And then from there, what we're looking at is how long do those people stay on the website? How many pages do they look at? So if they come to the website and they're looking at an average of 4 pages per session, that's awesome, right? That means the average is people looking at 4 pages of your website. That's higher than the national average typically, right? If you look at average session duration, that means on average, people come to the website for what? 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. If you're at 2 minutes and above, you're above the national average, right? So a lot of people are surfing the web, just clicking and clicking on and off of things. They don't have super long attention spans. So when you get somebody on average to come to the website and stay there for 2 or 3 minutes, you should do a small victory lap for yourself. That's awesome. That means that you're attracting good quality traffic and those people are engaging with the content, they're staying longer. So that's where Google is really looking at average session duration and pages per session. Because if people stick around longer and they look at more stuff, that means they like your website more. Right? So those are goals that we can have right out of the gate to make people happier on our websites, is to look at that. We're going to talk about conversions and things like that in just a minute, because that's more advanced. But one thing I love about the social section is this area called the user flow. And this is really, I think, helpful to people, especially who are visual. But like right now, Facebook is our top driver of traffic, right? And when people come from Facebook, I'm going to highlight the traffic, or I can view this segment. I'm just going to highlight Facebook for a minute. So when people come from Facebook, they've landed on these different pages. And what this is showing me is, so people came from Facebook, probably because we posted about Judicula Rock. A bunch of people clicked over to the Judicula Rock page. But after that, 93% of them left, right? And only 7% of them continued on the website. So my initial question when I see something like that, is that the goal? Is that the purpose of the page? Is the purpose of the page for people to come there, find out about Judicula Rock and leave? Because if it's not, something's not working. Because we lost 93% of the people, right? And so this is where I start to evaluate, like, is that purpose? Are the pages doing what we want, right? Now I know from talking to these folks, the Judicula Rock page was really created so people would come there, find out how to get there, see a picture of it, and then go, right? So there isn't a call to action to keep going on the website. There isn't additional things they're really focusing in on. They just really wanted to highlight that location because so few people have ever highlighted it, and you're only going to figure out how to get there if somebody's been there, gives you really good directions. Otherwise, you're going to get lost in the mountains of North Carolina and not know where you are, and your cell phone data is not going to work when you try to get out. So they really just try to create a utilitarian page. We don't need you to do anything else. We just want to make sure you can see this amazing, unique thing that you wouldn't find anywhere else, right? I can also look at the other pages. So here people ended up looking at a particular trail. And again, we see high drop-offs. Same here, right? This one is 100%. So people who came here, 100% of them left right after they looked at that page. So again, I know from talking to them that this is part of their strategy. There's some pages that are developed to drive people into itineraries and watching videos and doing things. And there's a whole portion of the website that is really for navigational usage for people while they're literally driving down the Blue Ridge Parkway, right? So they can find hidden treasures in our region that you don't find everywhere else. That's where the Blue Ridge Heritage Trail, their specialty is really in helping you explore 23 counties of North Carolina and find all these hidden gems that you didn't know were there, right? And so they have a lot of content built for that. If we go down here and clear the highlighting, I'm going to go down to Pinterest. And actually, I can view this segment if we want. So again, this is Pinterest. We can look and evaluate the same thing. So here we've got a little bit of differences, right? We've got some drop-offs on these pages. This one, though, just over 10% of the people kept going. And then I can see when they hit this trail page where they went next, was to this particular art gallery and this additional, let me see what that is. Oh yeah, that's actually just a page about some general stuff in the region. So what we're looking at is really this flow of people, right? Their customer journey to a certain extent. Or they came from Facebook, they looked at these pages, some of them left, some of them kept going, here's what they looked at, then some of them left, some of them kept going, right? And so this just allows me to see again, or how we're pushing people through the website, is it making sense and is it working? Because again, as a designer, I'm always thinking about how we evaluate this stuff and make the pathway we want people to take clearer, right? Like we talked about, like changing the color of the buttons, moving the buttons up higher, figuring out that we have a page where we're getting a lot of traffic, but then everybody bounces, right? They look at that page and they leave. Is that really what we wanted? Because if not, we might need to redo the layout of that page to make sure they have something else to go to next, right? And it can be a mixture of things. Sometimes it's things like blog posts where there's no clear call to action. Because historically, blogs are supposed to be read, but is what we really want people to do to come, read, and leave? No. So we got to design that reading experience to get you to do something else, right? If that's what we want. And sometimes we have pages, like I said, that are just too cluttered, which means we can quickly see we've got too many calls to action for people to consider. And there's so much that they have to choose from that they just disappear because it's too much to decide in that moment, right? So sometimes we'll declutter a page to keep people going. We'll adapt what the call to action is and things like that. And then if you're doing Google Ads, you can connect your Google Ads to this system. That'll be true about GA4. You'll start to see campaigns if you're running advertising. It'll show you your keywords for your ad campaigns and how well you're doing. If you have the Search Console, you can connect the Search Console that I showed you to this tool, and then it'll pull some of your rankings into this report, right? So this data actually streams from the Search Console directly into analytics. They can be integrated, right? And again, I don't know if GA4 is going to allow that down the road. So really right now is a great time to integrate those tools if you want. The key thing to integrating Google tools is you always have to have the same username and password. So if I set up Google Analytics with sarahbenoit@gmail.com, I need to set up my Search Console with sarahbenoit@gmail.com. I need to have access to my Google Ads, sarahbenoit@gmail.com. If they're all under the same account, I can integrate all these tools into analytics. If they're under different usernames and passwords, I lose my ability to do that. So this is where I really advocate that when you're using Google tools, you need one marketing account, one email that's for marketing that has access to all of your tools and becomes like the grandpappy master of the entire tool set. Because that's going to give you so much more freedom to pull your data together at different times when you want to. Any questions about this, about the acquisition section? I guess.
Pre-show, how you pulled up where people were going to from the Geo.
Oh, the actual, like the maps?
No, not the maps. You showed something where you put in Sparta.
Well, that's when I was just looking at the landing pages for organic search and stuff. Yeah. So if we go back into all traffic channels, my organic search is basically in that list. And I can click here. And I have two things that I can use in the system. So right now I have to click over to landing page if I want to see the pages that are getting organic search traffic, right? From here, I have two options: secondary dimensions. This is where I can add an additional data set. I can add a city, I can add mobile traffic to it, and I can try to get a picture of like, okay, we've got this many people on the pages and a good chunk of them are coming from mobile devices. But I also have a filter. So like, let me give you an example of this. So when you're blogging, a lot of times, like, so let's say I had a blog on my website. My domain is sarahbenoit.com. And then my blog automatically, sarahbenoit.com/blog/the title, right? So when I have something like that, if I want to see that whole section of the site, let me see if I can find an example in this one. I just have to say, I want to see everything with blog in the URL. and it's going to pull me every blog post and show me just the blog posts. All right, so I'm just going to see. These are all pretty much the same for these guys. But what I would basically do is I would use this advanced filter, and I would say include in the landing page the word blog. Or sometimes I have people with a news section. So it's sarahbenoit.com/news/ the title of the article. I'll just go in and say, show me everything in the news section of the site. And it pulls all that. I can see which blogs are more popular, which news items are more popular. So that's where architecting a site with clear hierarchy like that is going to make looking at your data a lot easier. So a lot of times people will remove that /blog out of their blog. So it's just sarahbenoit.com/ the title. I'm like, well, now it's really hard for me to separate out that section of the website and see which blog posts are the strongest, right? Because we didn't create any architecture. We just threw names in there. Does that make sense? Yeah, so the filter allows me to filter through the pages and pull sections of the site. That's why when I build websites, I'm always thinking about like, what are the different sections going to be? If it's sarahbenoit.com/about/services/blog/whatever, because I'm gonna have drop downs under those sections and stuff. It's like I really want to be able to evaluate each section of the site and filter it really good. Especially with blogs, that's the most important thing for me. So a lot of times we're blogging all the time. I'm like, I really need to see which ones are the best. I mean, I really need to see it outside of the rest of the website, right? And so I'm always looking to architect things that way to make it a little easier. But anything that's in the URLs, like in these ones, you can see a lot of these have the word trail in it. I could filter for trail. It will pull me all the pages about trails, right? There's some that have music in them. There's some that have like the names of different places, like Grandfather Mountain. There's a whole bunch of pages about that. So if I want to see all the pages about Grandfather Mountain, I can pull those up and I would see how well that group of topical pages is doing on Google, right? If it's driving us traffic. Any other questions or thoughts? Anybody seeing anything in their own data that they're wondering about?
Can you explain what the n.facebook and l.facebook?
Yeah, so yeah. So those are because Facebook, I can have an app on my phone and different phones have different apps, right? I have like Android versus iPhone. And then also I can go to a browser like Safari or Chrome and just get on facebook.com and not use their app and use their mobile site. So m.dot and l.dot are mobile versions of the Facebook system, right? And so if I'm coming from the app, it's just going to read as facebook.com. But if I went to Safari and then went on Facebook, right? Because I have some people who hate Facebook now, so they're like, oh, well, I have the app. So when they do look at it, they're taking these extra steps, so that's all it is. Yeah. And sometimes you'll see these long Facebook URLs that say things like click ID in them. That's Facebook's own tracking system. So Facebook actually adds a bunch of codes sometimes to the URLs to show you that they were coming from Facebook, and that's probably displaying in your insights and Facebook insights, or if you're running ads, it's showing in your ads.
You're in social, why would you have a not set?
Yeah, so not set or no data, anything that says no is basically privacy. Somebody has their privacy set to tell Google, absolutely not. You're not tracking me, and I'm not getting my data. And Google's been doing that for a long time. So we've seen that portion of data increase and increase and increase. Because while they're getting rid of third-party cookies, because that's what they're doing basically, and why we're launching GA4 next year, is because we're going to have no cookie tracking on Google after this. And so really what they basically said was the last, I would say 3 to 5 years, they've been giving Google users the ability in their settings to say, I don't want you to track me. And so then when they come to your website, they're just blocked out from the data.
Angie showed me in the website at the end, but it showed like there was traffic coming from Instagram. Would that be, because I got a link tree, but I didn't see a link tree. So Instagram and Instagram. Yeah, yeah. So would the Instagram be like link tree, then clicking the link tree?
If that's what you have in your profile, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Linktree used to show up, but they might have gotten smart enough to understand that it's Linktree coming through Instagram.
Because I didn't see that on there, and I did check that.
And Linktree actually tracks all your clicks anyway. You have it right in
Yeah,
there for free.
yeah, that's why I was like, why is it not on here? And I thought, oh, let's do that there on Instagram.
Yeah, it's probably reading it. It could be under referral sites though. So make sure you go under, that's what I was just gonna look at now. So like if we're under referral sites, you'll see there's some things like these mobile Facebook things that show up in referrals rather than social, right? Because they weren't in the app. So it didn't get read as social media. It got read here as a referring site.
I'm probably really fixing to show my age, but what is this?
It's just a website that has different things listed on it.
It's like number 4 on social.
It's, I think it's from. It's something like.
Yeah, it's just like another third party. But
I think it's where they allow comments.
yeah, it's like another, I haven't used it in a long time, so I'm not sure how people use it now. It's been around for a long time for sure. And so if you're using it integrated in your website, it will be tracking sometimes if people are interacting with that third party tool. Right, so anytime you integrate third party tools, you have to remember sometimes it's pulling in something to your website. It's not actually happening on your website. It's happening in this third party widget, right? And when that third party widget is happening, it's reading it as a separate website.
Yeah, it's in the, it's where people are allowed to comment on our blog posts.
Yeah, and so technically speaking, they're probably not coming from Discus. They're on your own website, interacting with the integration with Discus. Yeah, because a lot of times, again, widgets that are third party that are embedded, you're going to see how get read a little bit differently. Yeah.
Regarding Angie's question about the not set, you said it's in the Google business settings. Do you have it set to private or not to show?
No, that's individual people.
Okay.
Yeah, so as a user of Google, they let me say, I don't want to be tracked.
Okay.
Yeah. So the business can't control any of that. That's an individual person's choice.
Okay, so what is the not set?
Yeah. So privacy and security basically means what we're seeing right now in the US is that we are all being given the choice to say we don't want to be tracked. Google's been giving that choice to people over the last 3 to 5 years pretty largely. And so we're seeing the not set, and there's like another way of saying it too. But so I can't remember, it's like it's not set, and I can't remember if it's like no data or not available or something like that. But those both mean somebody has told Google they do not want to be tracked, right? So that means they came to your website, but they don't want Google to tell you how they got there or what they're doing.
It's the people you're, okay, I thought you were saying we weren't getting information. Okay.
No, businesses can't control it. That's the user's choice to have control over their data. Yeah, so anytime, so the other way that you're going to see, because a lot of us are seeing traffic go down over the last little bit. And a lot of that is because how many of you know the iPhone just in the last year started allowing every iPhone user when they go to an app to say, I don't want to be tracked, right? So everybody's seeing this massive drop in their traffic and increases in the not set data. It's because iPhone just told every iPhone user to have the freedom to say no, right? And that's going to continue. That's going to get worse. That's what we're going to talk about with GA4. That's why we're having these big changes, because how we have been tracking people for the last 25 years is no longer available as of 2023, right? So that's where, like, looking at the data you got now, super valuable, because it's not going to be there by next summer. Yeah. Make sense? Yeah. So that's what I said with like the movement of GDPR in Europe, all of that, it's all laws saying that we have a right to say no to tracking. And the more that that happens, the more we're going to see what we can see in the data go down. Right, so that's why I keep warning people. Now's the time to learn as much as you can. So I feel like in like 2 or 3 more years, it's going to be on us to have more first party data collection. We're not going to have all these free tools that give us all this stuff for nothing, because that is literally legally getting outlawed as we speak. Right? Yeah, that's why I think like taking a class like this right now, it's like 2022 is the last hurrah. Like early 2023 is the last hurrah, just getting free info about people most of the time without their consent.
So is there a way, a couple of months ago when I was in analytics, I saw an uptick in this really random town in Virginia. I think it was like Ashburn or something. Is there a way I can see
It's
what
a bot, it's a bot. We get the same thing, that the people who do your Google Analytics can do some sort of formula to get it out of there, but it's a bot out of the flash. That's exact town art.
Same exact town, yeah. So sometimes, yeah, you'll see an uptick in things and it's really just bot traffic. And then you have to actually have somebody help you filter it out. It's in the settings, it's a little more technical because you have to filter out IP addresses and other things. But it's the same way that, so like when I have an office of people and we're all working on the website, I have to go in and create a filter to get rid of everybody that's sitting in the office, right? Or now with remote teams, it's even more fun when I have to remove like 25 people and their individual home address because they're all working from home. But what I don't want to do is have all these people who are working on the website every week and every month suddenly skewing my data, right? And so we see like about 15% of this traffic is our own staff. Okay, well, that's not helpful. We should filter out their IP addresses. So yeah, so same thing with bots. If you see something like that where you're getting a lot of traffic from somewhere that doesn't make any sense, it's like a lot of times we're going to investigate if that's okay or not. Because sometimes it's just I've had some, I mean, honestly, like Russian spam bots are the worst. The worst. They've been killing me the last few years. I'll have a site where all of a sudden we're just getting like hundreds of visits from someplace in Russia. I'm like, are you kidding me? So now every report I pull is like skewed. And it's driving our time spent on site way down because the bots are hitting the site and leaving. So it's like our average session duration is like 40 seconds. I'm like, what? And so I have to go through and like remove those bots. And there's a whole sort of technical way to do that. But yeah, hopefully with GA4, we're going to see that goes away at the extent that it's been happening for Universal Analytics. That's been a historic problem with Universal. And I think getting away from session-based approaches is going to make a big difference, which would be awesome.
So, off of that, even though that was a lot, when I go to my Geo and I'm looking at Atlanta, there's no way for me to see, break down Atlanta to see what pages they're.
Yeah, so if we go up here back to that Geo area, just go into location. So I go into the states, and then I can go into Georgia. And then we get into the cities in Georgia where I should be able to usually choose Atlanta right at the top because they're the biggest city in the area. Right here. I'm going to see if we can add it. So this is where, if I do secondary dimensions, and it takes a little while to get used to secondary dimensions, but I should be able to go into behavior and find landing page. And now what it's going to do is it's showing me all the traffic we got from Atlanta and every page that they landed on, right? So yeah, so that's just a matter of like, as you learn that left side, when you click secondary dimensions, you'll start to find stuff faster. Like I know landing pages are under behavior, so I can easily find that. But they're sort of like, once you learn that left-hand side, the secondary dimensions kind of match up to that because you're basically just pulling in an extra data point from the meter. But yeah, so this will show you right away, like what pages were popular with that city. And like this one, these guys get a lot of traffic from Atlanta. So there's actually 83 pages. So if I open up to look at least 100 of them, it'll show me all the different pages that people from Atlanta have landed on in the last year. Right. One thing I'll point out here too that I think is really important. You see how down here, like we got like 83 pages, but I would say about go up to 38. So over half of them had less than 10 people from that city on the page. Right. So I just want to make this point. This is why the long tail matters, right? Because if I have 40 pages and every page got 10 people on it, that's 400 people, right? And so a lot of times we're looking at like what page got the most traffic, but you do understand in the long tail thinking, you can have all these more specific pages that are getting less traffic, but when we add them all up, they're actually making up a majority of the site traffic, right? They're having a huge impact. So that's where having more specific content that people can find, more specific things that solve their problems, the more you're going to see that actually the website can grow. That's why we want to add fresh content on a regular basis. And then in Universal, the last thing I wanted to show you, in acquisition, under all traffic, you do have referrals. Like I told you before, that shows you all the websites that have linked to your website and that are also being clicked on, right? So you can really see, like, are there links from other websites that are driving people to the site? Sometimes you'll recognize the website, sometimes you won't. So don't be afraid if you see something that you don't recognize. There's lots of different, again, there's no, anybody can link to you. They don't need to ask you first, right? So any website can have a link to your website. That's perfectly legal. And the last thing that's really exciting is this behavior section. And if you go into site content, you have these areas, all pages, content, drill down, landing pages, and exit pages. This is where I love to see the most popular content on our website, right? So this is where I'm not looking at the channels, right? I'm not looking at organic versus social or any of that. I'm just looking at the website as a whole and deciding really what is the most valuable content we have on the site that's working really well. And so again, we can see their homepage is number 3, right? These other more specific pages are actually the most important pages, right? This one little town, man, they got in a year almost 17,000 page views on that one page, right? So even though it's a small town and very niche oriented, it drove a ton of traffic, right? Because there wasn't a lot of other stuff on the internet competing for that topic. So it garnered a huge amount of that. But I love this part because, again, I'm able to see all the pages. I can drop down, like I said, over here to see the total list in more detail if I want. But I'm really able to see not just which pages are the most popular, but I can organize it by things like, so right now this page got the most sort of traffic, the most page views, right? But if I go over and look at average time on page and flip it around, right? We now see that the page that engaged people the longest was something else. So this page, these 2 pages right here, people spent on average 6 or 7 minutes on these pages. That's amazing, right? Now, it's only a little tiny bit of traffic, right? Because the topics are really niche, but holding somebody on the page for 7 minutes is a huge deal. That's like massive. That might as well be like 3 years.
Okay, our road trips, week stays, is averaging 716.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
wow.
amazing. So
I
now,
guess that's good if you're staying long enough to register with.
yes, but do you see how that means running something like a sweepstakes not only gets you to collect emails, hopefully, and builds a list, right? But it is now increasing the usability of your website and proving how good it is. Right? So this is where SEO is not like that exact science. There's all these other things that we do that help build the credibility of our website. And having a cool contest like that, that's something we're going to talk about at the end. Having a cool contest like that can really up the website's authority because it engaged people at a deeper level. Right? And like I said, one of the things I really like to do is look at the general landing pages as well. So I always look at landing pages for SEO, landing pages for social, and then a lot of times I just want to look at landing pages for the site as a whole, right? Because that's really going to help me understand what kind of content do we want to keep and evolve forward and edit and optimize versus what kind of content do we want to just delete and get rid of. So I don't want to delete and get rid of things that are actually performing. I want to adapt those pages to do better, not necessarily just cut them out, right? Just because they're old.
One thing I've heard in the past is never delete anything, just hide it. Would you agree with that, or do you think it's actually a time and reason to delete something?
Well, so what do we mean by hide?
So like, functions so it just doesn't show up to the view.
Like, I mean, not to be, but more specifically, what does that mean? Like, we're just taking it out of the menu, but we're leaving it live on the website. Does it mean we're actually like turning it into a draft instead of having it be published?
Right, so you can move from published to draft. More like
Yeah.
if you-
So that's turning off a faucet. So no, I wouldn't do that. As soon as I take it off the site and it's not published anymore, I lose any authority that it ever had. When I turn it back on, I'm starting all over again.
Okay. And
Right.
I know like there's some like where maybe you can still get to the links, but if you just land on the page, it's not.
In the menu.
on the menu.
Yeah, so yes, that is a strategy, but there's something that Google calls orphaning pages, which means when I'm Google and I come in and I index your website, if there's pages that people are landing on, but they're not in the menu, there has to be another way to get to them. And if there isn't, if there's no links anywhere on the website that take me into that section, it's now what we call an orphaned page. And that page will be worse and worse and worse and worse over time until it's useless, right? Because Google's like, we can't send random pages by themselves with no context. Like, they don't have to be in the main menu of the site, but there has to be a button, a footer link, a section, something that allows the bot to understand the architecture, right? So when we just start orphaning things, because I actually have a client right now, they have about, I would say 75 orphaned pages, because the last person who rebuilt their website didn't know anything about SEO, left those pages live, but didn't have any main architecture that led to them, right? So those pages were driving, man, altogether, I would say upwards of like 20,000 people a year. And when I started working with them this year, I noticed that those pages had dropped down to less than half of that. And it's because they orphaned them all in the last redesign. So I had to come back in and create a whole other strategy of how we unorphan those pages, because they were actually hugely valuable in attracting all these different people as landing pages until we just threw them out into this like dark section of the website and acted like they didn't exist. And to Google, that's sketchy. It's too much like spam, and it's weird to have 75 pages that are just hanging out in the wind with no real purpose. And so they've been devaluing those pages the whole time.
So like you have like something that's performing low over a very long period of time, you could say this is worth deleting instead of having
Yes,
not good content on it.
exactly. Yeah, I'm going to delete things when I really see that they're not serving a purpose, right? Then it's okay, because then I know we're not going to lose hundreds of people a month because I deleted something. If I can see only 10 people visited it in the last 6 months, well, are we going to cry over 10 people? No. That's cool. We can just delete all that, right? But we just want to make sure that we're not deleting something super valuable.
I have another question, which I might be the only one, there's so many
Yeah.
answered offline, but what happens when you come on and the Google Analytics, you have no idea what the login, email, or password is, but on your website, it's set up Google
Yeah.
Analytics, but it's in login, and you don't have the ability to find out that.
Yeah.
Is there any, again, if I'm the only one, is there a wraparound that you've seen?
Nope. Nope. You're up the creek. That's it. Oh, absolutely. You just lost all your data and you'll never have it again. Yeah, you got to be able to log in. This is why you have to have a marketing Google account that is in charge, that it's not attached to your staff members. So when they leave, they make it impossible for you to access your data. So yeah, unfortunately, if you don't know the username and password for that account, the only option you have is to strip that code out of your website and start over, and you can't backdate Google Analytics. It only goes forward. Oh yeah, no, to me, when I know that you've had analytics for like 6 years and you have no logins and we just have to sacrifice it to the gods, it literally hurts my soul to do that. It's painful. Oh yeah, Hotjar, those other tools like Meteor tools. Yes. Yeah, you're just not going to get historical data from that. Yeah.
There's a lot of that stuff.
Do you want me to reach out national passport? Because I'll call the last two people on position national.
They have certain things with attorney right now, so.
Yeah, I always tell people it's worth it to do everything you can to try to get access to that stuff. Or like if you know that it was attached to an old staff member, I've even turned on their old email so that we can try to go reset the password to their old account and then log into their Google, even though they haven't worked there for like 3 years, right? Because I was like, if we could get access to this, it's like 7 years worth of data. Like really important decision-making information comes from that. But a lot of times if like, there's really no way to figure out like that username and password. Yeah, and the one thing you want to make sure of is just, you can't have 2 analytics codes on the same site. Although we'll talk about GA4 and how you can do that. But you don't want to have like a universal code and then be like, well, we can't get access to that, so we just add another one. Because now you can guarantee those codes are going to fight and your data is not going to be accurate. So you got to strip out the old code and then add the new one for the new account that you set up. And then, like I said, it'll start going forward from the, like usually within 48 hours of setting it up, it'll start populating and you'll have that data going forward. All right, so we're going to take another break before we talk about GA4 and look at how that looks. It's 2:40, so let's come back here at 2:50. And again, if there's any questions, I'm glad to answer them. So if you've got something you want me to look at, let me know, but otherwise we'll come back in 10 minutes.
This Jesus over a couple of months. Yeah, we noticed over a couple of months.
You know, look at my job. I'm used to it.
She's worn out from like all of this.
You know, actually, my wife is kind of mad. She said, I don't know how you like, I'm gonna drive 6 hours, pass out, get up, teach for like 7 hours. And then like,
There's something.
you know, basically, I was like, I'm going out, the hospital, it's awesome here.
Are you staying another night or you?
Yes, actually, they were so sweet. I was like, I will drive home if y'all make me. I was like, I could sleep for a second. I would like to get off. Like sometimes when I teach and then I have to drive for like 6 hours, it's like halfway through the mountains, I'll be like, oh my gosh. I really just can't believe how upset I am. Last night, just when I came down, like these 2 guys were walking out, I was like, getting a coffee in the lobby. Right when I got here, they kind of 30 more on. And I wanted to do a few things for them, so I keep the wake up. Yeah, I passed out. But then it saw me and they're like, hey, girl, what are you doing? Because I was in my dress for work, so I was kind of dressed up. I think because I just got in my car after my webinar and took off. And it was something, what are you doing, girl? We're going out partying. I was like, I have to teach in the morning. No, I'm going to bed. They're like, come on, come on. And then when I got in the elevator, these other 2 people were like, where are you from? Yeah, I was like, Asheville. They're like, what are you doing? You want to come out? I'm like, no, I can't drink. I have to go to bed. I was like, man, I'm in Huntsville. It's hopping on. It's like, what's the name? Huntsville is wild.
I saw, we were eating, I forget that, it's a restaurant, but the brewery in it is right up there, like a block or so up. No, I can't remember what it is, but anyway, we were eating there outside on the patio, and, this was on a Sunday night, and, a guy, it seemed like he was drunk, was walking down the street, and he had a pet on a leash, and the pet came on like, it was a duck. Yep. I have a question.
Yeah, go
Have you ever worked specifically with Hilton hotels, Hilton hotels before? Okay. Well, I might have to read a lot to okay, so whenever we went to go and do our we weren't actually at the sea at first, and so she went and registered, and when she put in this, she also attached the tag. But
Well, this is GA4.
so but it's not allowed us to see any information, and I'm thinking this might be why. So inside, like on the little page, they, because they offer 2 reports. This one, the other one
They're not really giving access to that.
that's what I'm wondering if it because like the pages and that or that's a link or that website URL is attached, if we can't get access
I mean, they would
on.
have to hear, like, they would have to add you as a user to Google Analytics. But we're not, may not allow
Well,
it.
so we are,
There's
this
our
company is owned by us.
See how that's long thing? So the whole website is actually open about access to like this part. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So like, they're just gonna send you, they're not giving you full access. They're giving you reports.
So we can't see.
If they haven't given you, they would have to, they have to go in. they would have to pay for Google Grant access to it.
Or, so what if we were owned by, like, say, our company's actually not owned by Hilton,
Either way, you would have to have a Google Analytics login. It
Or
has
the
nothing to do with
property.
any of this. Yeah. They might be pulling this data from Google Analytics, but they're not getting access to it.
Well, that's what I'm saying, if they're pulling this data from the commission. That's what I was thinking, if they're able to pull this data themselves, then we can maybe have our own.
Because like I said, this screen, like, you see how like, this is not.
Yeah.
It's just an actual thing. That's another part of the whole. So Google Analytics is probably tracking the whole Hilton.com website. And they're not trying to do that.
Wow, because yeah, this is, they give us this every month.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's.
Well, that's crap, so we, but it don't let us see all the extra stuff that you.
I mean, yeah, you just have to ask them, can they give you access to Google Analytics? Again, if it's GA4, which is what uses streaming, GA4 is not gonna look like that anyway, that's universal analytics. So they're already moved on to the new version, this old version don't matter.
So they could have moved on the new version, so that we would have to.
Yeah, and we're gonna look at the second hour, it's gonna be all about the new version, but it's not gonna look like.
That's because whichever she registered for, she went, and there was like no data at all.
Well, yeah, because Google Analytics, if you set it up, you have to add a code to every page of the website.
Yeah, she added the code, but then that's when she got all crazy.
But she added the code to what? To this long browse?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably how it works. Yeah.
So if we have a user-friendly URL, I don't know if that makes a difference, it's just user-friendly.
No, unfortunately, like you're combining with the stuff. It's not-
Yeah.
it's not separate. So yeah, they would have to tell you if there's like a fuller version.
So we,
That's how it is.
so we have Mara talking versus, and she can do it for every other one of them.
Yeah, it's a little bit because, like, if you all had your own website, there wasn't part of the larger Hilton website,
Oh, so we could do it.
that would be different. Do you see what I'm saying? If
Yeah.
your website is connected directly to their website, you can start pulling art and tracking stuff. Right? It can cause all sorts of weird things to do. So they can't. But like if you had your own .com of your website on your own domain, was not attached to all their stuff, you could add Google Analytics to that.
And then we're, so we're owned by a hotel management company, so they have their own website, own domain and everything. But I guess if we had the link to the 2 hours that went to the page, so I'd make the reservations and stuff.
Well, all right,
It's
so
difficult.
let's
This might
clarify.
be for another session.
Yeah, let's clarify.
Because I don't know even what this.
Yeah, so here's the deal. What is your website?
The Omega,
Just all of them. What are the websites you're looking for?
so Omega. Hotels.com. Yes.
So that main domain is the management company. And then what's the Hilton thing?
So, just Hampton.
No, but I mean, like, what is that?
Oh, that's like,
Website.
that's when, if you were to Google search like, Hampton and Madison, Alabama, that's like where it takes time to
Okay,
make a reservation.
so these are, this one's for reservations. What's the other one?
This is our management company, so it just shows all of our hotels, and then you can click on our hotel and it takes you to this. Like it'll say book now.
This is here. Okay, so this is one website. This is another website. The tracking has to be separate, right?
Yeah.
So like, yes, they could have Google Analytics on this website, and then Hilton could have some kind of analytics on this website. If you wanted access to either of them, they have to give you access to their site.
But there's no way that via this website we can get that.
No, they're two different domains. See what I'm saying? Omega Hotels is one domain, Hilton.com is another. And because Hilton.com has tons of stuff attached to it, they typically don't give out Google Analytics accounts. They just send reports because their Google Analytics accounts encompasses every single thing that's on Hilton.com, right? And so I think what they probably are thinking is it's too confusing for one hotel to have access to the account because it would actually have every single page on the Hilton.com.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably all their subdomains as well, which would be quite a bit of information.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Okay.
but yeah, sometimes when you've got multiple things that kind of pointing to each other, it'll get a little confusing, because we're not at a point where Google Analytics can just start leaping across things.
So she said, what is the one she's gonna do next time with
GA4,
the new one is,
that's
That's
GA4,
GA4.
yeah. Universal Analytics is what we've always had. GA4 came out 2 years ago, and it's what we're all switching to next year. So a lot of people have already started using GA4, and GA4 uses something called streams. And GA4 will allow Hilton to track all of their websites and their mobile apps all in one place connected. So it makes sense to me that they've already switched.
Yeah.
Right? Because I know that a lot of the hotels have apps in the phone
yeah,
that people are using.
This is what's up. Thank you so much.
Yes. No, please, all questions are welcome.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out how to write my section. So I have, under, I have several. That,
Yes, I mean, I try to tell people, don't make them more Google accounts.
okay.
But, yeah, I have multiple. Yeah.
So if I want to set up on one of these backside, did I need a Google account that's like over?
So who do you want to?
Let's say.
Okay. So here's the deal. If you, yeah, you can create a Google Analytics account on your own Google. This one, it's fine. Keep in mind that when you leave the organization, it is your responsibility to pass the torch to somebody else. Right? Because if it's attached to your personal email, nobody else can log into it. When you decide that you're done, if you just walk away, you're taking all the analytics with you and nobody else knows how to access that.
Basically what we talked about.
Exactly. So it's just a matter of, you can set it up on your personal account with a clear statement that you are going to either pass that off to somebody else, or there's other people in the organization that you can add as users. So when I go to the admin, it's just like Facebook, right? I can have a Facebook business page, multiple administrators. So I log in as myself and work on the page, you log in as yourself and work on the page. Same thing with Google tools. So like I can create the account, and then I can add the executive director in their Google. I can add the marketing person in their Google, and now we all can log in and see analytics. And then when I want to go away, they still have access. Right?
So if there's another. I would want to. But it, so then I can do it individual. So I have two separate.
Yeah. I mean,
Or do you have it on?
yeah, so if you're working with multiple entities and you want to be able to hand off the analytics to them, you would create separate accounts,
Okay.
right? Because if these aren't related and you have them all under one master account, but it's for 5 different companies, now you're actually making it more confusing to hand off, right? So yeah, so when I have a Google account for the school, I have a Google account for my own company. With my clients in the web design company, I set up everything as my web design company. When I'm working at the school, I set everything up in there. Because those client bases are two separate things. If I just had one thing with everything in it, it's gonna start to get really confusing. So I'm not gonna know what needs to go where.
Okay, so yeah, okay, so in regards to this one, Kansas, someone else set up this website. This website. So I would need to get that information.
If you already know Squarespace, it's in the settings, and you can see it static. So you log into the Squarespace website, you go to the settings, just the settings, just one. If there's a code in there, yes, it's already set up, and you need to ask the person to add your Google account as an administrator, so that you can start logging in. And the same thing would go, depending on how this website is built. If it's Squarespace, you check the settings. If it's WordPress, there's usually a plugin. You know, like depending on how the website is built, there's ways to check it. But the best thing to do is reach out to whoever built it and say, yeah, I do want The answer is yes. And they just make your Gmail the administrator. And then you'll just do analytics log in, and it'll be right there. Yeah, that way we're not adding, like I said, double code. That's what we want to avoid, is having it and then adding it again. Because as soon as you add, it's weird. Supposedly it doesn't make a difference, but so many times when we have multiple codes and double up on it, I feel like they're having like a rooster fight. It's like all of a sudden my data is getting weird. And I'm like, oh, it's because we have two analytics codes on here. They're like battling out the data. Yeah, so it's good to check in. But Squarespace, I know is very easy because they just have a setting where you just put your account in there. It'll be like UA dash and a bunch of numbers. And if that's in there, then the account. Okay, so that was fun. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, you can feel free, I can do the card. You can feel free to reach out to me about that. Like, just give me access to the website, I can actually scan the code. And tell you. Yeah, so I can actually, even without logging in, I can just view the page source of your website and tell you. Yeah, and so I can do a quick thing, but if you log in yourself, usually go to plugins.
I'm not even on.
Yeah, if they give you access, there a lot of times they're gonna see plugins, and I think Real Analytics plugin or something. And there's also like theme settings in WordPress, and sometimes they put code right into the theme. And so, you know, we can look at both of those and see if in there at all. It's funny, sometimes, you know, see people have a plugin, they have to actually set up the you have a plugin, but it's not actually working. So with this one. Oh, yeah, if you have a designer or developer, they can instantly look. That doesn't tell you the person. No, anybody who understands how to build a website or code a website is gonna be able to tell you if they see the code. The code goes in the same place on our page. So like, if you understand the code itself, I can just actually like pull up the code on my computer, put in UA dash, and then it searches the whole code and pulls in, it can see it. And then I'm like, yep, we have an account, here's the number, we gotta find out who has the logins for this, right? And any designer developer should. Yeah, no questions are too much. They're all working. All right, so we're gonna jump back in. We got one more hour. So I just want to say to all of you in this room, I've chased about half of you away. So you guys are the total rock stars. But I'm just saying, you all are the total rock stars who have hung in until the final hour of analytical discussions on a Thursday. So high fives to everybody. You're all awesome. So I'm curious, just in looking at Universal Analytics, is there anything that stood out to people? Is there anything exciting that you saw? I know we've had some great questions on the break, but it's terrifying. I know.
I'm very concerned we are not going to know our login.
Yeah. That's okay, because we're going to talk about the changes that are coming down the pipeline. So truly, if you're ever going to lose your logins and not know what's going on, now's the time. We're about to have a big change over the next year. So you'll just roll in the changes.
Is it going to just be like a click or is it going to be gradual?
Well, they've given us 2 years so far, and we have a year and 3 months to prepare. It'll end July 2024. Yes, they have warned us. They'll be taking away this data. But again, yeah.
So do you think you can view old data, like previous data, and stop collecting data?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Universal Analytics, all of your historical data will stay. You just will not get any more data going forward. Yeah, they promised so far, Google has promised they will not be deleting the historical data. So I think every marketing person would like, we would march down to Google's headquarters in Tar and Feather down and say, we're like, we're going to delete all the historical information. But yeah, no, really what they've been doing is giving us 3 years to prepare. Because when they first announced it, everybody had a heart attack and started melting down. And so then we're like, we'll take our time, everybody. We're not going to rush you. And of course, I procrastinated learning it for about 18 months. I was like, I should start now. But any other thoughts or like takeaways, things that you think you can do with what we talked about?
Well, for me, I can show clients like This is why we do things.
Yes.
It's why you pay people, you know, why you
Yeah.
invest.
Man after my own heart. Yeah, as a marketer, that's the number one thing that matters to me, right? I do all this work on social media, optimizing websites, running ads, doing email, and I really want to show the impact of what I do. Right? So I work with a lot of nonprofits where we have to go to the board every year and advocate for the marketing budget. Right? And so I use data to go in and explain why they need to give us more money for social. Right? Why they need to give us more money to work on the usability of the website, because I can show them in clear factual things why we would do that. Yeah, it's really important to me in a lot of ways.
I'm not scared to look at anything. So I'm one of those, I'll click on anything to figure it out, but Roger, do y'all have an e-commerce site? Do y'all have an e-commerce site for your, I didn't know if there was anything, do you have any questions about Google Analytics for the commerce side of it, that, because I know y'all have a gift shop that a lot of us don't have?
Yeah, I don't know if I know enough to even ask a pertinent question, to be honest with you, but that's, you know, the monks I work for a monastery set up
Cool.
this website through Weebly and set up a store. And I had difficulty just trying to get the shipping charges correct
Oh, yeah.
and all that stuff. So we've got most of that done. Esmeralda is now putting a lot of, we have 35,000 items in our gift shop.
Yeah.
We're going to put all that, but we're trying to determine what needs to go in the store, et cetera. But that's really kind of where we're at right now. So I don't even have to get Google Analytics set up. So when we get back,
Yeah.
that's set up. I'll set up the
Yeah, so let me show you something, because this is, I think, really important. So if we just go to Google, because again, I'm obsessed with Google, it runs my entire life. If I just do how to add Google Analytics to Weebly. Here's the entire help center for Weebly on how you get started with this, how you set it up and everything, right?
Okay, so we just need to do a Google search.
Yes, and so you can ask Google these questions, right? I can even say how to add e-commerce tracking in Google Analytics for Weebly, right? And now I'm going to get specifically, if we have an online store, right, where people are ordering, how do we make sure that we turn on those e-commerce settings, right? Here's now full instructions. Right. So Weebly I've worked on. I mean, I wouldn't say I think their customer service is the best.
Right. It's difficult.
It's difficult.
I spent 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Just trying to figure out what I could do is through text.
Yeah. It's really hard because they don't really give you kind of a clear person to talk to, let's say, in that scenario. But I will say there's a ton of information online where people have put up screenshots of how to do things. So because they have their shopping cart built in, that's one thing I would just suggest is do a little research and see, because if you turn those e-commerce settings on in the beginning, especially, it's really gonna allow you to see, like, we got this much traffic from Facebook and those people bought $281.47 of stuff, right? So that's where, as a marketer, that's where we get into conversion things where I'm like, ah, yes, right? Like I get to say that my efforts actually made you $800. So like the last big advertising thing that I did, because my client is an e-commerce store and they have e-commerce set up, I could run a bunch of Facebook ads and then literally tell them like a month later, hey, I spent $500, but I made $1,400.
Sure,
right? And so that made it really worthwhile for them to work with me for that 3 months to help them figure out their ad strategy. So the e-commerce thing, it does take a little bit of like steps. So to me, you want to have like an afternoon where you're gonna like not let everybody interrupt you, which I know is hard if you have a brick and mortar place, but it's like, and really take some time to just read through what Weebly tells you. Because like I said, you'll find those awesome posts where they literally have like the screenshots. There's probably settings on your Weebly account that you have to adjust, as well as setting up Google Analytics and getting the code and then adding everything to the site.
Right.
Yeah.
Go to Google Analytics and all this pulled together. in one place.
Yeah, exactly. And I know Weebly does some of their own tracking in there, but most of the time they let you integrate Google Analytics if you want more
Right, yeah,
data.
there is some, but we basically, we'll post something on our Facebook account, with a link back to the store. And we, through Weebly's, what they have, I can see jumps and whatnot.
Yeah. And the other thing too that you might think about that I do with a lot of products that just makes tracking easier is pushing out like discount codes that I can use in the shopping cart. Because like I might do a special for 10% off on Facebook and I only put it out to Facebook. So everybody who uses that code, I know that's where they got it, right? And so now I can see a direct correlation in the purchasing. And so I like to do that throughout the year, different, like, I don't know, Mother's Day sales or Easter sales or Christmas sales. Like I'm going to come up with little discount codes and push them out on different channels. And then I'm more easily able to see which of those promotions really turned into actual money. Did you have a question?
No, would you recommend continuing with Weebly or to create your own website and just make the presence for possible maybe because Weebly, the only limit.
Yes.
So what would you
Yeah, so here's the difference. When you do it yourself on a website, you're going to want to use things like Squarespace or Weebly, right? Where they have the shopping cart built in. They have some things just built in. I'm a big fan of Shopify as well, which is a great e-commerce system. I would say if you're using Weebly and you don't like it, you might think about, can you move to something like Squarespace or Shopify? I do think they have a little bit more customization options than Weebly does. But the issue that comes in is when you decide you want to customize your own e-commerce website. This is a massive undertaking. I don't know anybody that has built an e-commerce website with any, like even 200 products that's paying anything under like somewhere between 6 and 10 grand, right? E-commerce is a lot of work. You need to hire a web design company that specializes in just that. You need to evaluate all the different e-commerce platforms that have online stores, decide which one is going to actually do everything that you want. And then it's going to be like a lot of work to create your own custom system. So like Shopify is a good example of an e-commerce store that is sort of DIY focused that a lot of people use. They get it as far as they can. And then there's people that are skilled in actually customizing Shopify once you're done with it. And so that's where like Shopify to me is a little better than Weebly. There's actually not a lot of people who will customize Weebly because it doesn't allow you all the things that you need to write the code, right? Squarespace is similar. Like you can go so far DIY, but then there's a lot of people that will build on Squarespace and customize it for you. And so you have the ability to make that leap. Whereas I feel Weebly, it's just a little harder. There's not as many professional designers that work in that system. So you end up having to make like a full change to a new platform. And I just feel like you only really want to do that when you have plenty of money, when you find a good e-commerce person to work with, and when like you really have like sort of the time and energy to put into that shift. Because, again, it might be worthwhile in the long run, but I do think Weebly in the beginning can do a lot just to get you started, especially if you've already worked on it, get the sales going. And then a little bit down the road, you can be like, okay, it's time to evolve. Like we want more shipping options or we want more customization in this area. That's when you would go choose another system and hire somebody, but really be thoughtful about what you needed to do. Because I have a lot of people that spend like $8,000, $15,000, $20,000 on an e-commerce website. And at the end of it, they're like, well, this isn't exactly what I wanted. And I'm like, well, unfortunately, you needed to be able to communicate that. I wish web designers were just magical. We always knew the right thing to do, but a lot of times if the clients don't tell us what they really want and what their goals are, we just do whatever we want, right? We do what we like to do, not necessarily what you were looking for. So Weebly will at least give you all, I think, like you start making a bullet list of things that it doesn't do that you want it to do, right? And then once you've kind of got that list down, you can start having a conversation about what it would look like to make that leap. But yeah, I do feel like it has to just be really worth the investment.
Investment.
Yeah, because it's like, even if you hand it off to a professional, you're going to spend hours talking to them.
Right, our sales would have to really dramatically
Yeah,
increase
yeah.
for us even.
And the other thing I'll encourage you is, everybody who's successful with e-commerce, which means you have an online store, most of them don't have one stream of income, right? So most of the really successful people, my partner included, has their own website, sells on eBay, sells on Etsy, sells on, right? So they have like 4 or 5 streams of income where people can buy where they actually just want to buy. So that's something too to think about. Do you really need to invest like 10 grand in one giant website? Or could you just diversify, right? And be selling your products in different places, especially since you have a great inventory, it sounds like, of different things. Because that's where sometimes you'll see people like put up a handful of products all over and then kind of see over time, where do they get the best response? Then they start focusing their energy on the platform that's doing the best. But I think the most successful e-commerce companies out there, you'll see, they have their own website, they have an Amazon, they have an eBay, they have an Etsy, and like they're tapping into different markets in all those places. And sometimes you'll make just as much money that way, and sometimes even more than you would shelling out a huge amount to create a custom website. Just because our custom websites cannot compete with Amazon or Etsy.
Right.
Those websites are already, they're always going to be faster, easier, more secure, right? Because they're multi-million-dollar companies that are supporting them. So that might make more sense, you know, or even like Instagram and Facebook, you can add products and sell them on social media, right? So there's other ways too that you might consider multiple revenue streams. Or even Square. So Square, for those of you who don't know, like when you swipe the card, they also have a whole online store that you can build if you have a card swiper, so that everybody can just purchase products online, right? So they have that built right into their whole checkout system when you use your iPad or their card swiper. Yeah. All right, so the last hour, like I said, we're going to talk about Google Analytics 4. I have created, like I said, sort of homework that if you are suddenly like, this is so fascinating, I must read more about it. I've put in a lot of different slides about this, because as I've been mentioning to everybody on the break, this is like one of the biggest changes in my whole career, honestly. And it was really funny 2 years ago, and they were like, we're going to do a new version of Google Analytics. And I think every marketing person I know across the country was like, we all had a heart attack. We're like, no. But at the end of the day, it is going to be better. It is going to be better. There's a lot of considerations that are coming into play. And I think even though it's a learning curve for everybody, myself included, in the long run, we're moving in the right direction as a society, which I think is super important. And there's a lot of other interesting tools that Google offers, again, that they're evolving. The Search Console got a whole facelift about 2 years ago. The Google Ads system has had a facelift in the last 2 years. Gmail had a bunch of features added to it. Google Drive had a bunch of features added to it. So Google's just been upping their game. And then in the pandemic, when everybody and their brother was sitting at home online, all of a sudden, things that they said would take 3 years took 2 months. And so they really amplified their work on upping their systems when so many people ended up in, you know, staying at home and doing so much more stuff online. The number one, like sort of the most important reasons why Google is making this change are because of these 3 things, right? Privacy and security. So as we've talked about, there's ethical questions about how we've been doing things over the entirety of my career. This is something I actually have specialized in the last few years, which is ethical marketing, which is a much larger conversation. But privacy and security is a huge part of that. And the truth is, what we find is most people want to have a choice. They want to be able to say no to retargeting. They want to be able to say no to being tracked. They're becoming more sensitive and aware of how much of their information is being tracked, down to the very minutia of things. So earlier we were talking about, you know, why is it that when I'm talking to somebody and we're talking about some product they bought, but then I drive away and an hour later I'm getting an ad for that product? Like, is my phone listening to our conversations? No. But what your phone is doing is it knows that you're standing next to a person in their house for 2 hours, your phones are next to each other, and it knows that that person was looking at that product. And since you guys hung out, it's going to show you that product in case you were just talking about it, right? So that's why the geo-targeting of our behavior is extremely, extremely specific. And Facebook and Google are like the leaders of this. They've been collecting that data for years. So it's very big brother. And a lot of actually Americans feel that way, right? We feel like this is too much. And so this is where we're seeing this kind of big questioning and conversation about privacy and security. Also, because of that, the laws and the actual legislation are literally, they're on the table right now being discussed. So most of you, I'm sure, have heard that there's lots of people in our Senate and our House of Representatives that are like, big tech, let's stop that big tech, right? And so that is a bigger conversation where the laws and the legislation are being decided on right now. In some ways, I kind of feel like, even though I wish we could all like hold hands, sing kumbaya, and get over like partisan problems, at the same time, being partisan about it is what sort of slowed the roll on some of these laws. So I feel like that's actually a good thing that we're arguing about it for a little while, because I think it's important for us to really make the right decisions, especially because I support a lot of businesses that use free tools like what we're looking at today, and they're very key to the success of our work. And so even though I believe in privacy and security, I don't want our Congress to pass a bill that then limits what small businesses can do to understand their customers better, right? Because that would be really sad for a lot of us that are smaller, because large corporations have plenty of money to spend figuring out what people want and need. But if you're a business like mine, I don't have that in my budget. So if you don't allow me to have access to things like Google Analytics, I'm going to miss out, and I'm actually going to lose opportunities that I've had for a long time. And then, like I mentioned earlier, some businesses now have a mobile app that I can download from the Apple or the Google store, as well as having a website. And what Google knows is the companies that are building apps, they want to be able to see people crossing between their mobile app and their website, and they want to see it all in one place. So GA4 is built for that. It is built for cross-platform tracking if you own all the platforms, right? So again, if I am the bank and I have a mobile app the customers are using, and I have a website the customers are using, I'll now be able to attach GA4 to both of them, and it will talk to me about the entire thing, right? The website and the app together. Who are these people? What are they doing? What are they looking at? So that's really what motivated Google to do this. So I've put in some information, this is actually directly, I'm sure Google would not be glad that I did this, but this is from the class that I just took. I just screenshotted a bunch of their explanations, so that way you guys don't have to take the class. You can actually just read through kind of their decision making behind this. And again, I think this is valuable when you have time to investigate, simply because it sort of shows you where we're headed in the long run, right, with tracking and reporting. And so again, you can see it compares what we've talked about today, universal versus GA4. I think one of the most powerful things is that top one, the measurement. Universal analytics has been based on what we call session-based data models. So like I said, that whole idea, users create sessions, create page views, right? That sort of perspective is what we call a session-based model. And what Google Analytics 4 does is focus us in on more of what they call events, right? And if we think about events, because that word is pretty broad, what they're really talking about is the actions and conversions. So really the difference that we're doing here with Google going from universal to GA4 is really what we're saying is we don't want to know like just what people are doing and how they're getting there. We really want to dig into what are the actions that they're taking, what's really motivating them, what's driving them to become more than just eyeballs, right? And this is something we talk about in social media too, because likes are great, hearts are great, you know, crying, angry faces, whatever it is we've got, those are great, but they're literally just eyeballs on a piece of content. And if I want to grow my business, if I want to grow my bottom line and make more money, I can't just have eyeballs, right? I need actually those eyeballs to turn into visitors. I need them to turn into customers. I need them to turn into leads, right? And so that's where that flexible event-based model is really about tracking action, right? And not just sort of the looky-loo perspective. I mean, people looking at things matters because we know the more people we have seeing it, the more of a percentage we'll have that are buying it. But it's really reframing the whole conversation so that we make that conversion, that action piece, the ultimate sort of focus. And so again, I've just put in some great information about what this means, why we're changing it. And I think what you're going to find is that this is going to change across the board with lots of different things. So if you have Squarespace or Weebly and they've got tracking built in, we're going to see some of that tracking change in the next couple of years, right? I think if you have Facebook Insights, Instagram Insights, LinkedIn Stats, Pinterest Analytics, as these laws pass, as we get rid of cookie tracking, which is basically what we're removing from the internet, which has been there for the whole time it's existed, as basically that goes away, we're having to really look at the fact that every way that we've tracked things in the past is going to shift in the next year or two, right? And especially as laws get made, it's going to shift in ways that maybe we don't even know about yet, depending on what laws get passed and what doesn't. So again, you can dig into some of the articles I've shared in here about kind of how it works. And I've included some screenshots as well, just because this system does look different than what we just looked at. And so one of the things that I think is important to realize from the first half is that if you are already on GA4, then everything I taught you in the first hour doesn't matter, because you have a completely different system than what we just looked at. So when we log into GA4, you'll notice on the left, things changed, right? We've got kind of a double menu here. We've got this section that's a pop-out, home, reports, explore, advertising, and configure. Because we're talking about marketing today, most of where you would spend your time in GA4 is the reports, right? Because that's where they're actually going to tell you, where did your traffic come from? What did they look at? How long did they stay, right? So all that data is still in there. It's just sometimes named other things, and it's in different locations, right? Once I click into reports, it's actually going to open up this area right here. And again, you can see it's different sections, right? No audience section, no behavior section, right? Those are all gone. What we've got, they've actually simplified everything, right? So we've got acquisition, and under there, we've just got 3 little drop downs. Engagement, we've got 4. Monetization, which we won't really, again, look at because it's mostly e-commerce. And then you've got user data down here. So life cycle is this top section. User data, you've got demographics and tech. And so we're going to look at how we sort of view the marketing efforts and succeed in the new system. That's the most important part, is to learn that first. How do I know what's working for my website versus not working, right? But I just wanted you to see how, like, really we're simplifying, right? We're streamlining everything, and we're changing terminology that can be talked about in exchange on websites and apps. So the language has changed so that it applies to both, which is why for some of us, like my own brain after 20 years, this has been like hurting my brain because they don't call the data the same exact thing. It's slightly different in a bunch of different ways. But for me, when I go into this life cycle area, the first place I want to go is acquisition. And again, that's the one word that they really kept. Thank goodness. They kept acquisition because that's what it means. How did you acquire your traffic? If I go into the overview, again, I've got like a little dashboard, right? So this is showing me my users and how many of them were new. It's showing me in the last 30 minutes, how many people were on the website, right? It's showing me paid search, organic social, referral, email. So there's my channels, right? So before I went into acquisition and channels and it showed me all of those, you can see they've slightly changed the language. And here's additional info about my channels, right? This company's running Google Ads, so it's streaming in their Google advertising information. And then under here, I have 2 things, user acquisition and traffic acquisition. And the reason that they're focusing on these 2 things is because user acquisition is about the individual person, right? And traffic acquisition is about the page views, the sessions, like the overall traffic. So they're trying to, and again, this is because of apps, they're trying to give us that perspective of like, we can look at the traffic overall, or we can look at the behaviors of the individual users, right? And those are going to give us 2 pieces of information. Again, you still got your dates up here. So I do love that it lets you roll back. You've got a bunch of preset options. You can customize it. So you can go back and look at different dates from before if you've been tracking for a long time. But right off the gate, when we look at user acquisition, how did we acquire the people? Like I said, these guys do a lot of Google ads. So paid search is their #1 driver for how they're getting traffic, which is very different than the last website we looked at that was mostly organic search, right? And here we can kind of see, it says new users by first user. So a lot of what they're trying to do is look at, again, new users versus return people, right? Understanding the difference between those things. And that's why I said earlier, there's big focus on your existing network and people who already know about you, who've been to your website before, versus the people that are coming for the first time. That we need content, calls to action, and things that speak to those two groups, because the people who've already been to your website don't need the same information as the people who've never been there before. So they're asking us to really think from that perspective. And when we scroll down and look at the longer list, again, we can see that there have been some changes in the language, right? So now the options are things like paid search, direct, organic search, organic social, referral email, and organic video. And there's even more of these designations that would show up depending on what kind of content you're doing. So if they were running social media ads, we would see paid social, right? So it's starting to break out these things where in the past, universal analytics, unless you kind of did your own like digging into your ad campaigns, you didn't always know if the Facebook traffic was an ad or organic, right? You kind of had to figure that out by correlating your Facebook insights to this. So they're trying to really pull out now the difference between organic versus paid types of engagement. And then you'll see we've got engaged sessions, engagement rate, engaged sessions per user. What I want to encourage you to do in this new version, see how when I roll over it, it defines it. So this is really important because I have to keep doing this because this stuff isn't all memorized yet, right? I don't actually remember what all the new data is called. So I can just roll over this and it says engaged sessions, the number of sessions that lasted longer than 10 seconds or had a conversion event, right? Or had 2 or more screen or page views. So they're basically defining engagement as staying for longer than 10 seconds, visiting more than 2 pages, or converting super fast, right? And if they do any of those 3 things, they're considered engaged. But if they disappear in less than 10 seconds without converting, and they only look at 1 page, they're not engaged, right? So that's kind of where they're helping us really define this language because the language is all new. And same thing here, if we look at engaged sessions per user, the number of engaged sessions per user. So basically that means is the number of sessions where the person stayed for longer than 10 seconds or looked at more than 2 pages, right? Average engagement time. So instead of average session duration, which is how long did I stay on the website when I visited it? Now they're really saying, we want to dig deeper into that. Not just how long did you stay on the website, but how long did you stay on the website when you were in what we call an engaged state, right? Which is looking at more than 1 page. So when we were talking about that 1 page where people are on it for the sweepstakes for like 7.5 minutes, it's like really, it's going to change if we look at it in here and those people didn't look at any other pages. Right? Because they might not be considered as engaged, right? If they only went to 1 page about a sweepstakes. And then, like I said, we're really incorporating stuff into the system that are basically events, right? And events are actions. And I've put this into, now this is going to get confusing if you're not technical because in the analytics world, when we say events or actions, I wish that what I meant was it said something like, you know, first user session, right? Or new user session, something really easy. No, it's kind of code speak. So it'll be all these kind of like weird sort of codey looking things that identify the events. But the events can be things like clicking on a button, watching a video, right? So this system sort of takes that idea to the next level to say, we want to be able to track a lot more of what people are doing on the page through analytics itself. Right? And so in order to add more events, basically when you create GA4, you can sort of look at the events, talk to your designer developer. There's going to be some that are automatic, like staying for a certain amount of time, right? They're automatically considered engagement kind of data. But then I can create a whole bunch of events on my website that I want to track. And it's going to be a lot easier to set it up and a lot easier to see it in the reports because they've already built this list of events that they know people want to track, right? And so it's just going to be built right into the system. With universal analytics, we've been able to do this, but we needed a coder to come in and code everything, right? UTM parameters for the buttons, right? Do all this extra work. And so what they're trying to do is streamline it and make it a lot simpler. If we take a look just at traffic acquisition, again, this is going to give us a little bit of a different view. You see how the numbers are much higher? So again, this is where they're trying to show us that one person can be responsible for tons of action, right? So they want us to have that natural difference, right? Looking at individual users is looking at individual people, but looking at the traffic acquisition really shows you a little different perspective, right? So paid search is still at the top, right? But a lot of times what we'll find is in some circumstances, when we look at the user acquisition, we can see one channel is driving more people to the site, but another channel is actually driving more engagement, right? And so we might be driving less people from social, but the people coming from social stay longer and read more. Does that make sense to everybody how that works? Like how they're trying to give us that perspective. Because sometimes we just look at the biggest number, we're like, the biggest number wins, but that's not accurate, right? It's sort of like social media. People say to me, well, I want to reach 20,000 followers this year. I'm like, why? If it's just because 20,000 looks good, I don't suggest you do that. Because if you end up with 20,000 people who don't care, who don't engage, you're actually going to ruin your own social media, right? Like I would rather you had 12,000 people that actually commented and cared about what you were saying, right? And got involved than having 20,000 people and half of them are not really engaged. That's what we're really learning in the digital world is if we play that quantity over quality game, we'll end up with accounts that don't produce results, right? We'll end up with super low engagement rates and our data will make it look like we have a massive following of people who don't care at all about what we're doing. So that's where I think Google is trying to push us in that direction of thinking, right? That just because we see the bigger numbers in certain places doesn't always mean that's where we're getting our money from, or that's where we're getting the actual conversions and action from, right? So we really want to have those two perspectives. How are we getting all that brand recognition, all that reach, all that name recognition, and how are we actually getting people to take action? Because a lot of times those things can be congruent or they can be different, right? It really depends on your industry, your network, how long you've been around, the relationships you have with your customers, and things like that. If we go into engagement, again, this is where in the past, we've seen things like behavior, looking at the content drill down, right? Looking at this type of information. Now Google is really pushing us to just think from an engagement perspective, right? And so here we can break down into, how long people are staying in the site on average, right? We can look at user activity over longer periods of time. They're using the word sticky, right? That's something we talk about in the digital world a lot, which is when people come somewhere and you hold their attention, you're stickier, right? And so we're always looking at the fact that sometimes we'll push something out and it's really exciting for like 24 hours and then it just starts dropping off. And it's like, we really want to start to think, okay, how do we keep a piece of content on the website getting a lot of attention and then keep it up there for a while, right? That's the goal of making things stickier. Of course, there's always going to be things that are trendy where they pop up and down. That's normal, right? PR does the same thing. You get an article in the paper and all of a sudden you get a bunch of traffic to the website and then it disappears like 2 days later, right? And so that's normal in some cases, but the ultimate goal is to figure out, especially in the digital world, how do we stay more memorable? How do we become more shareable by people, right? So they tell other folks. How do we get them to really stick around and do something after they've looked at a piece of content? So this area is really kind of building out into that And you can see things like users in the last 30 minutes. Again, they've integrated a lot of the real-time data right into each of the reports. So even though there is a whole real-time section, this section sort of streams in so that we can have an idea of how things look over time, because I'm looking at pretty much the last 5 months here. But then I can also see this sort of mini snapshot of just like this afternoon, right? That kind of tells me what's been going on today. And under engagement, again, we've got this sort of overview, which is things like time spent on site, how many views of different things. But then we get into things like events and conversions. This is where, like I said, as you're setting up different things you want people to do. One of my favorite events is if you have a form on your website you want people to complete, have a thank you page. Because we can easily track how many people hit the thank you page once they fill out the form, right? Or if I have a downloadable PDF, that PDF is a link when I put it on the website. Every time somebody signs up and they get to that link with the PDF, that's a conversion, right? It's a lead generated. And so I can literally track, we got this much traffic and 12% of the people completed the form. We got this much traffic, 18% of the people downloaded the itinerary, right? If I have a sweepstakes, I can have people signing up and I can have a thank you page for that sign up. That's going to tell me what percentage of people hit the website and participated in the sweepstakes or the contest. So again, it can be purchases like an online store, but there's all these other things that people can do, right? And even video content, if you're producing video content, there's events around starting the video, watching 10 seconds or more of the video, watching 30 seconds or more of the video, right? So we can use video content in an even bigger way by figuring out what's keeping people entertained and keeping them on our website. And under engagement, you've got this pages and screens area. This is basically like that behavior section content drill down area, right? This is going to show me all the pages of the website and what is most popular, what's getting the most engagement. And you'll see here, it says page title and screen class, right? So this is actually giving me the title that's on the public facing part of the page. Or if you're me, I'm old school. So I'm going to go in here and say, I want to see the page path because I've spent the last 20 years looking at URLs and I would prefer that. Right. So some of you who don't look at URLs all day will probably prefer the page titles. But I love seeing the actual URL string because I've been doing that for so many years. But they're giving us ways to view it in whatever's more comfortable for us. And I think that's actually a real positive for people that haven't been using these tools for years and years, right? Is that you can have this sort of simpler way of looking at things. And again, you can see up here, it's like this is 10 out of 354 results. So if I drop this down to 500, it's actually going to then show me every single result on this list, right? So that's all the pages on the website that Google has indexed that are showing traffic in here, right? And I can see the different titles, the different topics. I can see the total number of users and what percentage of them were new people versus a percentage of them that had already been there before, right? So again, it's giving me that automatic view. Like I said, if you're digging into e-commerce, the monetization section is where they've included all of that. So you've got e-commerce, you've got, if you're selling things in your mobile app, you can track that now. If you're doing different advertising, again, this isn't going to matter to most people if they don't have an online store, because this type of tracking is really for shopping carts, right? If I don't have a shopping cart, I can't really activate any of this stuff in the same way. And then instead of audience, you've basically got this user section. And this is where I will say that I am excited that over time, I'm hoping this is going to populate a lot more. So again, right now, when I'm in the demographic areas, I still get all my locations, right? I still get a lot of information about cities. But when it comes to gender, interests, ages, all the specifics that we talked about, you can see on this website, it says no data available, right? It's because they're not large enough to be pulling in enough data, right? For Google to say they can see it. Now, these are folks that are running a ton of Google ads. So I'm sad they don't update it. It feels like they're spending enough money they should have it. So I'm hoping that as we move forward, we're going to see this demographic area like become more robust. I think what Google's holding off on right now is that we're in the middle of a bunch of legislation where they're not sure how it's going to pan out in the end, right? They're not sure what is actually legal for them to be showing us versus not showing us because there's some muddy water. And so I feel like that's why we have a whole other year that we're going to be working on this. We're really going to be figuring out how do we start to show some of this, what are we allowed to show? But again, you still have a lot of the information about the geolocations, which I think is really valuable. And then this area for tech is really going to allow me to see that stuff that I showed you around technology that your customers are using. So what devices are they using? What browsers are they using, right? If I had an app, there's a bunch of stuff in here for apps. If you don't have an app, then you're not going to see any of that, right? But this stuff that's really valuable in my mind for us understanding what's going on. So like a good example would be here, you can see for this website, most of their traffic are using Windows browser, right? Android browser, right? And then Mac is right below that, right? And the iOS isn't too far behind. But it's like if I'm testing our website, especially if we're fixing things, we're redesigning, I'm going to make sure that I really test it on Windows and Android first. Because that's where a vast majority, double and triple the amount of traffic is coming from those two places than iPhones and Macs. Right? The only caveat about that is how many of the iPhone people said they didn't want to track. So you might have more iPhone traffic than you think you do, but a bunch of iPhone people are being prompted to say no all day, right? So that's a whole other, I've been teaching classes just on that. We actually did that at DIY. I talked about the weird iOS Mac Facebook battle. I did a class called Mac versus Facebook, right? Because they're in a big fight about this. It was funny. Facebook came out and said, hey, Apple, this isn't fair. You're going to hurt our advertisers. And then Apple did a massive campaign that literally was there. It's literally commercials where it's literally just like Apple iPhone equals pros. Like they didn't even respond to Facebook. They were just like, nope, sorry guys, we don't care about your advertising platform. We're just going to stick it to you stat and you're going to have to live with it. So it's been interesting watching the Apple company and Facebook hash it out. I always feel like it's like Clash of the Titans, right? And this is like two giant corporate businesses that are pretty much gigantic overlords in their field. And they are having a big battle on what the legality of this all should be. So this is why the politics piece gets interesting, because you've got Apple spending a lot of money on politicians. Then you got Facebook spending a lot of money on politicians trying to lobby for each side of the privacy and security argument. I will say Google goes more often with Apple, right? So that's where I think Meta can do all it wants as Facebook and Instagram's overlord to try to assert themselves, but they are certainly facing off right now with some of the biggest companies in the world who are advocating for the privacy and security part of their audience's needs, which is interesting.
Makes a big difference because historically, I was looking at our data, historically, we're more Apple products than Android products.
Mm-hmm.
So it just makes me wonder.
Yeah,
is that
check in
just
and
a
taking a
personal
look at where
decision?
you're at now. Yeah, because what's going to happen, I think, with the iPhone stuff is you have to start to realize those iPhone people still might be a huge amount of your traffic, but you aren't going to be able to engage them the same way, right? And like I said, Apple, because I'm such a, as much as I'm obsessed with Google, I'm obsessed with Apple, obviously, because I own all my gear is from them. You know, they have really, I have to say, it's funny, they're really popular with more technical people, which is hilarious. But the people who are more technical, we demand better privacy and security, right? Than the general public. And so that's why Apple's been the first to really go that direction, because almost all the technologists out there, all the marketing people out there who use Apple products, we're actually saying from an ethical standpoint, what we've been doing is wrong. Right. So I've been taking classes with an awesome organization, if you want to check it out, called the Center for Humane Technology. And I've been studying with them for the last year. Super amazing stuff. They did the documentary Social Dilemma.
Saw that.
Yeah.
It was eye-opening.
Yes, powerful stuff, right? Powerful stuff. And so a lot of the public and even business owners haven't known, because I've been in social media since 2005, this conversation has been going on for a decade, that what's going on is actually psychologically damaging.
Yeah.
We all knew it. The public just didn't fully know it until Tristan Harris and a bunch of other folks were like, we have to start telling people about this, right? And you had whistleblowers from Facebook being like, we have a bunch of academic studies that were basically causing teenagers to like harm themselves, right? So we had to start talking about that publicly because we haven't been talking about
I heard a thing this morning about a monkey. They've been showing, this monkey has a page, he has a TikTok page, and people have been coming up and showing him this stuff, and they're afraid that it's gonna cause him to get bullied by the other monkeys.
it.
Because he'll stop watching, stay and watch. I mean, they were serious.
Yeah.
There's people that's really serious, and the monkey's gonna get bullied.
Well, that's like, we talked about AI earlier. I mean, so 2 quick stories about artificial intelligence that I find fascinating. So first of all, I'm sure you all heard there was a time when they made an AI, probably 2 or 3 years ago. And they were like, we're going to take this AI and we're going to get access to the internet. And we're going to be like, learn what it is to be a person, right? Learn what it is to be a human. Well, it took approximately like 2 or 3 days for that AI to become completely racist, misogynistic, and horrible, right? And so that was really eye-opening. So when you take a machine and you tell it to learn from humans, it learns to be horribly evil, is basically what happened. So that was one study where they were like, we really have to deal with the ethical problems that we have with our tech. The other thing is that Facebook, this was probably 5 years ago, and it wasn't in the United States news at all, but Facebook was doing some testing on their AI. They have multiple AIs that they're working on and developing, just like Google. And I read in the BBC that Facebook's artificial intelligence team, they had 2 AIs and they were letting them talk together and learn together. And then when they took English, they developed a new version of English and they started having a conversation that none of the scientists could understand. And so they had to unplug the entire thing because everybody got freaked out. But the 2 AIs that they were teaching to like connect and learn, they connected, learned, made a variation of English none of us can understand, and then had whole bunches of conversations for like 2 weeks. And everybody was like creepy, and we didn't turn it off. Right. And I thought it was funny, that didn't even really get reported in the States, but the BBC was all over it, being like Terminator 5. Like, they were just like, we have to be really thoughtful about that.
They turn it off.
Yeah, I mean, who knows what Facebook's really doing? I think Meta has proven to be, maybe those AIs are part of what's building the metaverse. We don't know, right? But I think it's really interesting because those ethical considerations are why we're having these types of conversations, right? Because it goes far beyond just, I don't want people to know where I live to be able to drive over to my house, right? It's really that there's these bigger ethical conversations around how technology impacts humans and our own mental health and emotional health, how it's affecting now 2 generations of people that don't know what it's like to live without it. So we have Gen Zers and the gen below them. These people have never had an experience where they didn't have a smartphone, right? And so like there's some real ethical questions that we have to ask ourselves about that. And so that's a bigger part of, I think, what Google is a part of and what's motivating them to change their tools in different ways.
I was trying to have like some sort of middle ground because, I mean, to be honest, I know I got Facebook pulled up and I always say this all the time. I know you hear me talk. I mean, because let's face it, Facebook can be really creepy with some things, but at the same time, I don't mind like if I search for something and then like something pops up that I really need and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is great. Like I don't mind being targeted in some of those more benign ways,
So just so you know, you and every other American feel the same way, right?
Yeah.
So all of us, when I teach remarketing, which is basically when I'm out and I look at a product and then I pick up that cookie and then it follows me around other websites and keeps showing me ads. Like, sure you don't want those shoes? Sure you don't want those shoes? Sure you don't want those shoes, right? When I teach that, everybody in the room will be like, Big Brother, ew, I hate it. We're all buying it, y'all. We're all paying for it every time. Americans will be like, Big Brother, oh my God, I want that dress, right? Like that's instantly how we are. And so we're all living in this, like, what is the middle ground, right? And that's actually the question. Legally, ethically, what is it? And we don't have an answer to that, right? That's the problem, is we have a bunch of people trying to figure out what the answer to that question is. So that's where ethics in marketing is becoming a bigger and bigger conversation, because ethics in technology has been around a long time, but it's starting to get to that point where as businesses and marketers, we really have to understand what's going on. So I've been teaching social media for years, right? And about 7 years ago, I started realizing that when I get done work and I'm on social media, I feel bad, right? And it's not because I feel bad, it's because I looked at Instagram for too long. So because I work sometimes 7 or 8 hours, I started to feel the impact of that on my own personal life. So I started investigating what was going on. Then I started teaching my students how we can take better care of ourselves so we don't feel bad at the end of the day after we've worked on Facebook for 8 hours, right? And so as that conversation started, I realized there was a bunch of technology people that were already asking this question, right? And so when Social Dilemma came out, I was so excited because that actually allows us to be more responsible with this amazing gifts that we're being given, right? We're being given Google Analytics, we're being given Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest. But if we're gonna have those awesome things, we also have to know the true impacts of them so that we make good decisions, not just for ourselves, but for our customers. Because we're basically telling all of our customers, go use this stuff too, and be more involved in it and more engaged in it. If we're gonna do that, then we really wanna make sure that we're handling it in a way that's really responsible. But any questions about GA4? No, go ahead.
There's a separate code to put in your website, GA4 versus Google Analytics.
Yes, and so GA4, again, I've put a bunch of information in here that you can learn about how to set it up. Google is encouraging, even though I said earlier, you don't want 2 universal analytics codes on the same website. That's no good, it's gonna cause problems. What Google will allow you to do though right now is have universal analytics installed and the new version. So you just set up a new property in Google Analytics, and then you basically say, I want to add Google Analytics 4, and you just put in your same website and everything. It'll spit out a new code. You can add it to your website, and then they can both run at the same time. And that's what I'm doing with all my clients right now. Right? I have both of those systems set up so that we can learn GA4, but we still have access to universal. Yes. And so in the slide deck, you'll see there's sort of like a bunch of information about how to do this, right? And set it up. Because I realize this is going to be a longer conversation over the next few months. And even if you work with a designer or developer, the truth is not all of them have had time to like fully investigate this. So I would encourage you, when you get the copy of the slide deck, like, seriously, give this away if you need to other people. Take it to your web designer. Yeah, and be like, hey, yeah, feel free to let people download it. I am all for spreading it around if we can help people start to prepare for next year. And I think there's even people like me in the industry where we're trying to learn this stuff while we're still working 50 hours a week. So it's like that process of learning, it's like give yourself that space to do it. But the last thing I want to wrap up on is, so where are we headed? What can we do looking at the future? Because we are going to see these changes in data privacy and security, in ethics and things like that. We're going to, and I honestly really believe in my heart over the next, I would say minimally 3 to 5 years, what we're going to see is a dance, right? Because we don't know what we're doing. We've never asked these questions before. So I think what we're going to see is, depending on who's in power, that the laws, the legislations are flexing back and forth, right? That's my guess, just because of the nature of the United States, because we are a bunch of states that make up one gigantic country, that it's not going to take us a year to come to an agreed upon solution, right? We're going to probably dance around the solutions for a while. But there's one thing that we can all be doing going into the future that's going to be really valuable, and that is to think about first-party data. And what that means, it goes back to our first class earlier on SEO. How awesome is your website, and how can it be more awesome? And how can you get people to willingly give you information instead of trying to use free tools that take their information in ways that may or may not be okay down the road, right? So first party data, to me, is really about creating websites where people can interact and engage and give you information, whether that's creating an account to purchase products like an e-commerce site, right? So if somebody signs up for my e-commerce site and puts in all their info, they have to create an account to be secure. I can customize what I'm receiving from those people. I can also have drip campaigns after they make a purchase that invite them to give me more information, right? We can do sweepstakes and contests. We can do free downloads. We can have people sign up for all sorts of different things that would be useful to them, where we get to ask them some questions, right? Your name, your title, your location, right? As long as it's simple and straightforward, if we're giving people something of value when it comes to their experience on the website, something that helps them, that's useful, we might find that they willingly give us that information, right? And that's really where we want to start brainstorming how we can do that more on our websites. I feel like historically speaking, we're relying on a lot of large third-party corporations to extract that data from people without their consent. And that is where I think we're going to see we're moving away from that, and we're moving more into people consenting to giving up their data. And if you have a good relationship with your customers, what do you think they'll do? If they trust you, if you're authoritative, right? If you're credible to them, they'll give it to you, right? And so at the end of the day, all we're talking about is that our long-term goal needs to be the relationships that we have with people. We need to stop. So one of the things I've advocated for my whole career is why in the technology world that we decide to call human beings users. And there's no other way that I use that phrase that is positive, right? A user is negative in almost every scenario until we get to technology, in which I think it's a good idea to call everybody that. That didn't make any sense. We just need to call them people, because that's what they are. And none of us want to be viewed as a user. We want to be viewed as a person, right? Whether it's by other people or the technology. And so that's where I think our bigger picture is really thinking about the value of this. How on social media can we gather information? How in our emails can we gather information? How can our websites be more interactive and really have things that we give to people in exchange for them trusting us with their information? How can we have better customer databases, right? How can we have outreach that's more relevant and more valuable to people? That's where, if I was going to say, looking forward 10 years from now, if we all want to be relevant in that world as a business, we're going to start making this type of stuff our priority, right? And we're really going to, what we're doing isn't just making first party data, we're making the relationships we have with our customers the priority. And so I just put a little bit of information in here. Like I said, searches for online privacy have grown more than 50% year over year across the globe, right? And third-party cookies are going to be gone in the next 2 years. So how we've always done things is going to go away, and we're going to need to be creative in how we start to gather this information from people that we want to really connect with. So how's it going to change? We're going to need to think more about lead generation, about asking people questions and kind of a call and response conversation. We're going to have to spend more time thinking about our brands, who our brands are, what they can really contribute to the world, with how they really impact people. We're going to have to tell those stories. We're going to have to think about having more people register to use our websites for different things, right? And we're really going to have to get clear on what information do we need from people to get to know them better, and then create strategies that incentivize them to give us that information willingly, rather than having Facebook and Google working together with the credit card and debit card companies to take everybody's data and sell it to each other. Because that's what's been going on. We can blame Facebook and Google, but the truth is, you know where they've gotten a lot of their data over the years? Because every bank that you and I bank with has been selling our purchasing data to them for 2 decades, right? And so that's where we're seeing the giant corporations. They've all been in cahoots doing this thing for a long time. And what we're about to see, I think, is laws and legislation break up that symbiotic nature, right? And when that's already been happening to Facebook over the years, where the things you can choose in the ads are going away because they keep getting data stripped out of their list that they can and can't share. So like I said, be a steward of this first party data. Going forward, think about how you really build those relationships with people and get them to actually contribute that stuff, whether it's surveys, contests, free downloads, forums, free webinars, free events, whatever it is, how can we really build relationships so those people want to show up and say, I want you to have my information so you can better communicate with me, right? That's really because some of us really do want that from the companies we love, right? It's really that, that whole move to say no to spam is now like going to the next level, right? So again, you can read about a lot of this stuff. I put in some great content ideas, just what it looks like to create more interactive things on your website. Again, if anybody ever wants to talk more about this, I wish we had more time to brainstorm these ideas as a group, but just thinking about, can people sign up to get access to a video? Can they sign up to potentially win something, get a virtual tour of something, right? A location, maybe the museums, like sign up and then we're going to do like a live tour of the museum before you get here, right? There's things like that where you could really incentivize people. And for those of you who are doing blogging, I think is going to evolve to really become more content hub style thinking. And how do we get people to sign up to get the blog content, right? Really integrating that with email marketing approaches. I'm already talking to a lot of people about that. You can see great examples of sort of content hubs that have been developed on a website where there's blog posts, but there's lots of other things to incentivize activities, putting in your email, requesting more information, live chat with people, right? All of those different things are available to engage folks. And again, just some tips on contests and giveaways. We have a lot of success with this type of stuff and building our lists and building our relationships with people. So if you've never thought about things like this, sweepstakes ideas, this can be something where you can even combine forces with other businesses and create one big giveaway, right? Where you all benefit from collecting that information. So again, end of the slides, you've got all of these different resources, everything we've talked about, Search Console. If you want to get really geeky, go to the next level of Google Tag Manager, which is a whole other thing that we won't talk about, but it is related to Google Analytics. The Tag Manager is pretty technical, but it's very exciting. It does help you track a lot more events on your website, especially if you're using Universal. And then of course, there's all my contact information. So we have a great digital drop-in webinar Thursday, May 5th, if you want to join us. We'll be talking about storytelling for destinations, featuring an awesome company out of Austin, Texas. But we do a lot of free stuff every month that you can be a part of. Then of course, if you're interested, you can click on this graphic when you get the slide deck and it'll take you to the website about our event if you're interested in it. And you can watch the video. And then at the very end of both of these slide decks, you have all my contact information. So please consider me a resource. Please consider me somebody you can reach out to. Don't Google things for 5 hours. If you need a question, just shoot me an email and I'll usually respond pretty quick. But y'all, you made it to the end of the day. High five to all of you. It's a lot of information. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We just got a little slide back.
Oh, thank you so much. That's awesome.
Appreciate it. And right now, we're waiting to see the agenda, but more than likely, Tammy and I will be going to DIY, and Sarah has made the generous offer, if we get a group together, 5 or 10 people going, they might give us a little more of a discount. So